Good morning from Doha. After more than 15 months of war and nearly 50,000 deaths, the world hails a ceasefire agreement between Israel and Hamas. It's Thursday, February the 16th. 33 Israeli hostages and hundreds of Palestinian prisoners should be released in the first stage of the ceasefire, which is due to start on Sunday. Despite the celebrations, the violence is still going on for now. At least 32 Palestinians have been killed in Israeli strikes on Gaza overnight.
Benjamin Netanyahu, the Israeli Prime Minister, is warning that the deal isn't yet sealed. Israel's Security Cabinet will meet later to discuss the agreement.
Also coming up on The Breakfast Show for you here on Sky News Thursday morning, Keir Starmer is in Kyiv this morning to show his support for Ukraine.
The Prime Minister's visit comes just days before Donald Trump arrives in the White House amid huge uncertainty about what that might mean for Russia's war.
Joe Biden warns oligarchy threatens democracy in America as he says farewell to the nation. Nurses say the NHS is in its worst state ever with chaos in hospital corridors. And getting ready for liftoff and a new frontier in the space race. Amazon founder Jeff Bezos' rocket prepares to blast off from Cape Canaveral.
T-minus 2 minutes.
Good morning from Doha. In the Middle East and around the world, people are celebrating a ceasefire deal between Israel and Hamas. Israel's cabinet will meet later today to discuss the agreement reached here in Qatar, with Benjamin Netanyahu warning that the deal is not yet sealed. Well, let's just show you some images coming out of Gaza at the moment. This is early hours in the morning in Gaza, but overnight we saw celebrations, in the Strip when it was announced that this deal had come into force. Overnight, at least 32 people have been killed by Israeli strikes on Gaza. But if the agreement holds, the guns will fall silent on Sunday.
The ceasefire agreement is in 3 phases. First, a 6-week initial ceasefire and gradual Israeli withdrawal from Gaza. In the first stage, Hamas will release 33 Israeli hostages, at least 3 every week for 6 weeks. The remaining women and children first followed by men over 50. In return, Israel will free hundreds of Palestinian prisoners, including some serving lengthy sentences. 600 truckloads of humanitarian aid will be allowed into Gaza every day of the ceasefire. If Phase 2 is agreed, all the remaining Israeli hostages will be released, with more Palestinian prisoners freed in exchange. If negotiations for Phase 3 are successful, the bodies of hostages who've died will be returned to Israel. And there'll be a 3 to 5 year reconstruction plan for Gaza.
Well, in a moment, we'll get the very latest from our correspondent, Alex Rossi, who will be live with us from Jerusalem. But first, my colleague, Alistair Bunkle, reports.
Finally, after 467 days of war, a ceasefire has been agreed between Israel and Hamas. Within minutes of the news breaking, there were celebrations across Gaza. They were dancing in the streets of Khan Yunis, a city that has been almost totally flattened over the many months of fighting.
All citizens feel relieved and happy with the news of the ceasefire, and we hope to return to our homes, villages and cities as soon as possible.
We have been waiting for this happiness for a year and a half. No one can feel the feeling that we are experiencing now, an indescribable feeling.
In Tel Aviv, where weekly demonstrations calling for a deal had brought the streets to a standstill, they lit candles and finally started to hope that their relatives would be coming home soon. And in Doha, where the negotiations have been taking place, the Qatari Prime Minister said that they will work to make sure that the deal sticks.
We are committed. We will continue to do everything we can, everything possible,
together with our partners to ensure that this deal is implemented as it's agreed, and this deal will bring us peace, hopefully, at the end of it. I believe that it all depends on the parties of the agreement and acting in good faith in that agreement in order to ensure that no collapse happening to that deal.
And in Washington, it was welcomed by the outgoing US President Joe Biden, whose officials have spent so many hours and days to reach this moment.
There was no other way for this war to end than with a hostage deal. And I'm deeply satisfied this day has finally come, for the sake of the people of Israel and the families waiting in agony, and for the sake of the innocent people in Gaza who suffered unimaginable devastation because of the war. The Palestinian people have gone through hell. Too many innocent people have died. Too many communities have been destroyed. In this deal, the people of Gaza can finally recover and rebuild. They can look to a future without Hamas in power.
The deal will need to be ratified by Israel's Security Cabinet. It is expected to be approved. Many in Israel are against the deal because it doesn't guarantee the release of all the hostages in the first phase, and because Hamas is not defeated in Gaza.
Today we affirm that the occupation has failed to defeat our people and our resistance. They achieved nothing but destruction, massacres and war crimes against our people. They could not take their captives by force. They could only get them back through a negotiated deal with the resistance in exchange for a ceasefire and a dignified prisoner swap.
Even as the negotiations were continuing in Doha, the fighting carried on in Gaza. This was an airstrike early on Wednesday morning. The ceasefire will come into force this Sunday. The coming days will be a mix of anticipation and tension as both sides try to make final military gains whilst their citizens count down the hours to peace. But after so many months, so many thousands dead, and so many failed attempts to end the war, there is now an end in sight. Alistair Bunkle, Sky News, in Jerusalem.
Let's go straight to our international correspondent, Alex Rossi, who joins us live from Jerusalem this morning. And Alex, we saw there in Ali's piece the optimism, the hope. This is a historic moment, but it also is an incredibly complicated and complex deal that could break down at any point.
Yeah, it is an extremely complicated moment, and I think actually the negotiating sides aren't exactly clear on how things will work, particularly after phase one. We're already hearing from the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, who is accusing Hamas of backtracking over some of the details. Now, the Israeli Security Cabinet is expected to meet later. They will discuss the agreement, but we should bear in mind, Yalda, that it is not official on the Israeli side, at least, until that vote has been taken, until they've voted and decided to go ahead with it. Now, the expectation is they will vote and they will approve the deal, but it does really reflect the kind of anxiety, the tension that still exists around this. Now, I've covered many ceasefires over the years, and they all really rest on faith, on good faith, on both sides. And as we know, between Hamas and the Israelis, there isn't much of that. It is in very, very short supply. So it will be an extremely nervous wait, really, until Sunday, and when they hope that deal comes into place. But, you know, we've had false starts before when it's come to the ceasefire negotiations, but finally, after 467 days of brutal war, it appears that they are now ready to do the deal and put a ceasefire into place. Now, perhaps a better way of looking at it, certainly initially, is not actually as a ceasefire, but as a cessation of hostilities with further negotiations to try and work towards a permanent ceasefire. But there is still plenty of work to do on that front to actually make it a reality. Yeah, absolutely. Alex, thank you so much for bringing us up to date.
So as you were hearing there from my colleague Alex Rossi, just how fragile this is. This is a historic moment. There is cautious optimism, and we are still waiting for it to become completely official from the Israeli side. I'll be speaking to an Israeli government official in about 20 minutes' time. But for now, Kay, back to you in the studio.
Yalda, for now, thanks very much indeed. The latest from that hoped-for Middle East ceasefire that should come into place, all being equal on Sunday. As Yalda was telling us there, though, that the Israeli government has to ratify that before then. As Yalda was speaking, we saw a rocket launch, didn't we, to the side of your screen. Let me tell you a little bit more about it now, should we? It belongs to Jeff Bezos. It's the New Glenn rocket, and it's certainly one to watch, is what Tom Clark, our science editor, tells me. It's his first big rocket launching, but it is partially reusable and capable of lifting heavy payloads into Earth's orbit, or even, I'm told, to the Moon or Mars. Promises to be a serious rival to Elon Musk's SpaceX Falcon 9 that's crushed competition previously in the global space launch market. It's, as I said, it's called the New Glenn rocket. That name probably familiar to some of our viewers. It's named after John Glenn, the first American in orbit. Could be a game changer, is what we're told. It was delayed, actually, earlier on in the week, but it looks as though it has had a successful launch.
Chamber pressures continue to look nominal.
Meantime, also some breaking news. The UK economy has grown for the first time in 3 months by 0.1%, is what we're being told. In November, that's actually less than what was anticipated. Experts were telling us that it was likely to grow by 0.2%. That is not the case. Nevertheless, we have heard from the Chancellor. She says, "I'm determined to go further and faster to kickstart economic growth, which is the #1 priority in our plan for change." Talking about that in just a few moments' time with Paul Kelso. Meantime, Keir Starmer is in Kyiv this morning on his first visit to Ukraine as Prime Minister. Deborah Haynes is in Dnipro, the region, for us now. Why is he there? Deborah, good morning.
Good morning. Well, it's taken 6 months, actually, since he became Prime Minister to make this trip, which is in contrast to his predecessors who were very quick to come to Ukraine to show their support. He's coming here to this country to sign what Downing Street is calling a 100-year partnership, sort of a demonstration of the UK's strong commitment to Ukraine. It's looking at areas of not just defence, but also non-military areas like science and technology. And it talks about how this partnership is going to help to support Ukraine's long-term security so that the country isn't vulnerable to the kind of brutality inflicted upon it by Russia. But the reality is that brutality is happening right now, and it's unclear how words like this are going to stop Russia's war in the east and across this country at a time when there is huge uncertainty, just days before Donald Trump takes office. Questions about what the incoming president plans in terms of his promise to end the fighting here. We've been talking to soldiers who say they very much want an end to the war, but what they want is Russian forces out of Ukraine, whereas what Donald Trump and his advisors are signalling is that maybe they're going to try to force some kind of compromise between Volodymyr Zelensky and Russia's President Vladimir Putin.
OK, Deborah, for now, thank you. More on that, of course, throughout the course of the morning here on Sky News. Meantime, President Biden has delivered his farewell address before he leaves office next Monday. In it, the US president warned of a dangerous oligarchy threatening American democracy in an apparent dig at incoming leader Donald Trump. Mark Stone reports from Washington.
As the sun set on the Biden White House, this was his farewell moment, an address to the nation, the final one.
My fellow Americans, I'm speaking to you tonight from the Oval Office.
And if expectations were that he would use it to list his achievements with the bitterness of a man who lost, well, then expectations were wrong. It was instead a siren song farewell.
I want to warn the country of some things that give me great concern.
and words he perhaps hopes will echo long after he's gone.
Today, an oligarchy is taking shape in America of extreme wealth, power, and influence that literally threatens our entire democracy, our basic rights and freedoms, and a fair shot for everyone to get ahead.
Far from being a greatest hits farewell, it was instead an extension of his Trump is a threat to democracy argument.
Take over, Elon, yes, take over.
And that threat is here, the man he did not name, who represents, he said, a dangerous concentration of power.
I'm equally concerned about the potential rise of a tech-industrial complex that could pose real dangers for our country as well. Americans are being buried under an avalanche of misinformation and disinformation, enabling the abuse of power. The free press is crumbling. Editors are disappearing. Social media is giving up on fact-checking. The truth is smothered by lies told for power and for profit.
President Biden knows that no one writes their own legacy. It's for others to do that. And so his message seemed to be wait and see. That in time, beyond his time, these predictions and his own achievements will be recognized, and that would be his legacy.
You know, it will take time to feel the full impact of all we've done together. But the seeds are planted, and they'll grow and they'll bloom for decades to come.
Right now, he is the president who precipitated the return of Donald Trump. He is the faltering figure whose hubris prevented him from stepping down before it was too late. He is the foreign policy president who couldn't control a chaotic world. But legacy isn't set in the moment. It is cemented long after. And to a great extent, that legacy will depend on what happens in here over the next 4 years.
Mark with us now, stayed up specially. Hi, Mark, Happy New Year. As far as you're concerned, what sort of figure did he cut last night?
A figure who was very concerned about the future. I was really struck by that. As I said, the expectation was that he would come across as frustrated, as a man who thought that the American people didn't recognise his achievements. And there are achievements which he did outline. The fact that the American economy is the envy of the world, the fact that it recovered from COVID so much quicker and so much better than so many other countries. The fact that he put in place an extraordinary infrastructure bill. He re-signed climate accords that Donald Trump in his last presidency ditched. All of these are key and important achievements that the expectation was he would focus on altogether and sort of show a frustration that the American people just didn't recognise all of that. Instead, he chose, as I say, to sort of issue this siren song of what he thinks are the real concerns ahead. And he used this phrase that I think really stuck out, an oligarchy, that America is becoming an oligarchy. He wasn't talking about Donald Trump, but about those around him, about Elon Musk, this man who seems to be at the center of Donald Trump's orbit, who has such massive financial and political power, it seems, and who has such huge reach. And, of course, others around him. We were looking earlier on. There are 13 billionaires who are in Donald Trump's incoming cabinet. That is unprecedented. Now, Donald Trump would say he has appointed these people because of their brilliance. That's why they're billionaires. Elon Musk is a product of American opportunity, he'd say, an immigrant who is a brilliant entrepreneur who has done well and therefore should be in a place of power. Not so, says Joe Biden. These people are agents of unchecked power, and they are very dangerous in such an environment. So Joe Biden claims. So it was a really interesting speech in which he seemed, in this swan song moment, to warn of the dangers, not just of Donald Trump, but around Donald Trump.
OK, for now, thanks very much indeed, Mark. Thank you. Jonathan Reynolds, MP, with us for the government this morning. Looking forward to Donald Trump coming into office?
Well, I think it's going to be a challenging time for anyone who is responsible for trade in a big economy because of some of those pledges that were made in the campaign. But look, I think there's opportunities for the UK in this. There are lots of things I, as the Business and Trade Secretary, would like to see the UK doing more closely with the US in areas like technology, digital trade, in services. So if there's an offer from the US to talk about how we could collaborate closer together on that, of course we take that up.
Are you worried about a tariff war?
I am, because the UK is a very globally orientated economy, so the exposure, the danger to the UK is actually greater than even some comparable countries around that. So a lot of our work has been preparing for that, engaging early with the new administration. If you look at their take on tariffs and why they've put that forward, it's a huge concern in the US in this new administration for the trade deficits they've got with China in the EU. Now, that doesn't apply to us, so we're in a different position to some of the European countries or other partners and allies of the US, but we can't be complacent, and we're very well prepared for that engagement.
What might it mean for our car industry?
Well, for the UK car industry, which is a jewel in the crown of our economy, it's a very export-orientated economy, and we've got firms that sell a lot to the US, a lot to China, a lot into the EU. So when you're responsible for that, you've got to be really careful about making sure your relationship with one country doesn't damage our relationship with another. And that's why I want to see the UK at the absolute heart of being able to trade with the US, with the EU, with China, with India, with the Gulf, as well as and other parts of the world. But you're right to say that's an area where you've got to be very careful to make sure we're giving ourselves the platform we need to succeed in each of those markets.
Because it could cost jobs, couldn't it?
Ultimately, tariffs are paid for by your own people. So it's got real pressures in terms of inflation, in terms of your ability to employ people, to export to other markets. Free trade's a good thing. Reducing tariffs, whichever partner that is important. So look, we're well prepared for this. We've got a good argument to make, and I think there's a chance, actually, if we play this right, to get even better relationship out of some of these things that have been put forward, but we can't be complacent. And there are risks, yes, of a tariff war between friends, allies in other parts of the world.
Tell us about the investment in the new Sunderland manufacturing site.
Yeah, great investment today. The powertrains, that's sort of the engine part for an electric vehicle. New £50 million investment partnership with Nissan in Sunderland today. Comes on the back of another piece of great news yesterday. Big Malaysian investment in the Bristol area, £4 billion. So look, there's a lot to do to turn around what has been a decade and a half of disappointing economic performance in the UK. But we're seeing a real endorsement of the government's plan for change, of our ambitions around growth from these kinds of investments. And of course, I want to see particularly the automotive sector go from strength to strength.
And is this electric vehicle linked?
Yes, and this is what the
that's
powertrain.
the problem, isn't it?
Well, it's not a problem because the world has regulations in place, all these key export markets, to make this transition. But what we've got to do, what I've done already
quick enough,
as the business secretary, you're right. And there's concerns sometimes. I think people underappreciate how good these products are. We've seen actually quite a lot of adaptation or people taking up electric vehicles in the UK, but we've got to push further.
Figures are down, aren't they?
Well, they're not where I would like them to be. Most of the firms have met the targets under the policy for this year. But you're right to say I've had to show a little bit of pragmatism from the government to change, to open a consultation on changing how those regulations work as companies make this transition to electric vehicles, to make sure we're not penalising people who produce vehicles in the UK. I feel that is what I inherited from the previous government. So myself, the Transport Secretary, the Net Zero Secretary, we're all united in saying, yes, we want to make this transition, but we want jobs and things produced in the UK as part of that.
But is it not right to say that car industry in the UK, many of them are having to buy credits from Chinese and American companies in order to try to meet their electric vehicle targets?
It is, and that's why we've opened the consultation, because I don't want that to happen. I want this transition to work, but I don't want it to work in a way that penalises people making vehicles in the UK and instead sees that flow of money, investment money, into countries like China. They've adapted very well. Well, yeah, in the main, I mean, the problem that we have seen is demand has fallen across all of Europe. So yes, America and China have been the beneficiaries of those policies. So we're committed to that transition, ambitious for it, but I don't like the system we inherited from the previous government. I think you could even say it's penalising people who produce in the UK.
Yeah, as is the net zero targets by this government. So you're going to have to look at those again.
No, because the automotive sector is an export-led sector in the UK. We sell abroad 80% of what we make. And all of those countries are committed to a transition to electric vehicles. So if we didn't change our production, we're going to have nothing to sell into these countries. So the destination's not in question, but how that policy works, how we work with the private sector to get there, that is the crucial thing here. And I think the mixture of this government's got, which is ambition but pragmatism in terms of how you get there, that's the right mix.
Are you not worried about the viability of Nissan? I'm reading that they're in a lot of trouble unless they merge with Honda.
I'm not complacent about anything because what you have seen is a huge growth, particularly in China, of electric vehicle production, and that's really changed the business models, the economics for a lot of European producers. But, you know, I grew up in Sunderland myself. I know that factory particularly well. absolutely world-class facility, brilliant workforce, leading production standards. So there's a bright future there, as long as you've got a government which is supportive, which they do. And actually, on the potential collaboration with Honda, look, my ambition would be, why can't that work for us? Why can't potentially we get to a situation one day where some Honda vehicles are being made at that facility, that brilliant factory in Sunderland? So I see opportunity everywhere. I'm an optimistic person. And look, I'm not complacent about any of this, because the challenge for the European automotive sector is very, very strong. But if you've got the right government policies, the right relationships to those companies, there's a good future ahead.
Are you putting any money in it, the government?
Yes, most of the automotive investments we see in the UK and in most European countries and around the world involve a collaboration between the government and the private sector. This one is the same, so we work very closely with that. We don't subsidise companies, but we work together on things like R&D, on new investments, on how we get the land ready for that, and that's part of this programme.
The reason I'm asking that, of course, Secretary of State, is because Nissan, according to CNBC, the only chance of survival that they have is to merge with Honda. If they don't do that, if they stay out on their own, it looks as though they are likely to fail. They only have 12 or 14 months to survive. So why would you risk government money at this stage?
Because we are absolutely committed to a UK automotive sector. We're absolutely committed to that incredible impact Nissan's had in Sunderland and the northeast of England and for the country
Even if it may go under.
as a whole. Look, I recognise Nissan as a company are facing some challenges across the world, but I think to give up on them, to say it's a completely negative picture, would be a huge mistake. And there's a great future for that factory back in Sunderland. And if you've got a government willing to work with Nissan to do that, that's where the future lies.
What do you think of today's GDP figures? Not as good as expected.
Well, the economy growing is always
0.1%. It couldn't grow any less.
The economy is growing, inflation down yesterday, government borrowing costs coming down yesterday. Look, all of that's good. It's an endorsement of the plan for change, but I'm not satisfied. I want more. I think people underestimate how committed this government is to making, at times would have been, two difficult decisions in British politics to get growth where it needs to be. And that is what this government's committed to. We've got the regulators coming in today as part of that conversation. Our agenda on skills, industrial strategy, trade, planning, it's all about this. So, of course, the economy growing is good news. Of course, inflation coming down is good news. But we're very, very ambitious and determined for the future. Darren
Jones sat where you were yesterday, and he was not as critical as the Prime Minister was about Jerry Adams potentially receiving compensation because of a change in the law that this government wants to implement. What's your view?
I think anyone wants to see someone like Jerry Adams receive compensation, and that's what the Prime Minister made clear yesterday. We've had to change what we inherited. I mean, the Legacy Act was unlawful. There was a legal challenge to it. So we've got to put something new in place. The compensation people receive comes from something called, I believe, remedial orders. And look, there was real suffering from people, ordinary people on both sides of the divide in the Troubles. I believe that's what that is about, rather than people like...
But you can put something in place to make sure that somebody like Jerry Adams doesn't receive any money.
Yeah, that's what the Prime Minister was committed to yesterday, and I think he's right to say that.
OK. What's going on with Tulip Siddiq? Let me just ask you about her before I let you go. It looks as though there is yet another case, another inquiry that's been launched in Bangladesh investigating money laundering and power misuse, and she seems to be named in that again. What's going on?
Well, I mean, Tulip is related to the former Prime Minister of Bangladesh. There's been significant changes. Look, I can't comment on what they are or aren't doing. I think Tulip's statement yesterday when she left the front bench spoke for itself. She was not found to have breached the ministerial code or any wrongdoing.
No, but she had her wrist slapped.
Well, she took the decision to step down. I thought the Prime Minister's response was right, was generous, was recognised the brilliant job that she had done. So there's a lot going on in Bangladesh that, through family,
No, but she's named.
Well, look, I can't comment on what or isn't happening with the new interim government in Bangladesh, but from Tulip's point of view, I think she's acted in the right way with integrity.
Again, Darren Jones sat there saying that she was good at her job. Do you think she was?
Yes, I do. Myself was once the shadow city minister for the Labour Party. I know that brief very well, and I know that Tulip was very well regarded in the city.
Just before I let you go, tell me what's going on in Ukraine.
Well, the Prime Minister is visiting Ukraine today. Our support for Ukraine has been steadfast. I myself, through being the business secretary, have done a lot in the first 6 months of this government in terms of our export support for Ukrainian companies, for defence exports to defend Ukraine. We obviously want to see Russia's illegal invasion come to an end, and the Prime Minister's support for Ukraine is visible by being there today.
How much is it going to cost?
Well, we have put significant resource into defending Ukraine, as have other European countries and the US. National security has no price tag. I mean, the fact that
So
Russia
a lot,
has behaved...
So a lot.
I don't think you can say that it's not the right thing to do, it's not the right investment when you have Russian forces breaching national borders, behaving in that way. Ukraine is about our security as well as the security of Ukrainians, and it's important the UK remains committed to that.
So you're not going to tell me?
Look, I think the figure in the Prime Minister's press release today is around £3 billion a year of support to Ukraine. There are other ways we support Ukraine. UK Export Finance plays a role in that. But staying steadfast in defence of Ukraine is absolutely right.
OK, for now, thanks.
Thank you.
It's good to see you as always. Still to come on The Breakfast Show for you here on Sky News Thursday morning. Israel's Security Council prepares to vote on the Gaza ceasefire deal. We'll speak to the Israeli government live. Plus, Keir Starmer's in Ukraine, just hearing about that, weren't we, to shore up support for the country ahead of the return of Donald Trump. We speak to Ukrainian MP Kira Rudik.
Many people have told me that God spared my life for a reason.
President for a second time.
That reason being to save our country, he said.
A remarkable moment, isn't it?
Another chance, another 4 years. The question is, what does he do with those 4 years?
Watch the inauguration of Donald Trump as he becomes president for the second time.
So help me God.
Congratulations, Mr. President.
The full story, first on Sky News.
I'm Stuart Ramsey, and I'm Sky's chief correspondent.
An enormous explosion that's just come down. I think it was a monster just landed in between us.
Hundreds and hundreds of people hoping to get north, ultimately to get to the United States.
It's a border where they're not welcome, yet they keep coming.
We saw snatch squads going in, grabbing people, taking them out and putting them into trucks and taking them away.
They make about 50 kilos of fentanyl a week. It's incredibly dangerous and toxic stuff.
There's been an upsurge in deaths. The fighting between the gangs is getting more and more vicious.
Is this now all your territory?
Yeah.
The battlefield is outside the barricades, which is over there. This is much more like a normal town. It's really sending a clear message that Venezuela is eager for change. We're being crushed.
Free from wherever you get your news. We are in the middle of a forest, in a jungle really, and they're attempting to keep these men alive. This is real, hardcore emergency medicine. The information on this could bring down the entire network, not just in Iraq and Syria, but across the world. Sky News, the full story first.
Well, hundreds of thousands of people have been using the beast for years to traverse Mexico, but it is really dangerous. Many people have died riding it.
I'm James Matthews, and I'm Sky's US correspondent, based here in Washington, D.C. Donald Trump, it would appear, is about to learn his fate. There's no doubting the strength of this hurricane as it roars through. Sky News, get the full story first. Do you fear a fourth indictment? Is it a draw?
He's from Sky News. He's from Sky News. He's entitled to ask me questions.
There's always more to the news than a headline. We want to discover, to delve a little deeper, to find out what's really going on. Explanation, analysis, the people at the heart of every story. I'm Neil Patterson, and this is the Sky News Daily Podcast. So, by the end, we'll hopefully all understand what's going on in the world just that little better. Available wherever you get your podcasts.
Hello again, everybody. Welcome back to Sky News Breakfast Show. Our top stories for you this morning. Israel's Security Cabinet are expected to meet today to discuss whether to accept the Gaza ceasefire deal. President Biden has delivered his farewell address to the American people 4 days before he leaves office. He warned of what he called a dangerous concentration of power in the hands of a few very wealthy people. The Prime Minister is in Kiev today to meet with the Ukrainian President, Volodymyr Zelensky. It's Keir Starmer's first visit to the country since taking office back in July. Let's talk about NHS nurses. More than 7 in 10 say they treat patients every day in unsuitable or overcrowded settings. Tell me more, Alice Morning.
Good morning. Yeah, this is a report that's come from the Royal College of Nursing, and it really paints a very bleak picture of the NHS. It's used the testimonies in a survey from around 5,000 nurses, and it really emphasises just how overcrowded those conditions in so many hospitals are. And for the first time, we've got a sense of the breadth of the inappropriate places that patients are having to be cared for, including, we hear, cloakrooms and bathrooms and corridors. And corridors are particularly emphasised in the report. We have one nurse saying that it is regular for there to be about 40 patients used that are kept on corridors and side rooms. And the reality of that is another nurse says that we have cardiac arrests in the corridor or in cubicles that are blocked by patients on trolleys in front of them. That's delaying life-saving CPR. Now, the RCN have called for immediate government action to end corridor care, which they're saying is just becoming normalised and no longer just occurring in the winter months. But reading through the report, you're really struck by the lack of dignity for so many patients. And here are a couple of the testimonies. One nurse said a patient died in the corridor but wasn't discovered for hours.
Oh, goodness.
And that is not just one nurse who said this in the report. There's multiple nurses who say similar things. One said, we have one cubicle space that is for corridor assessment and toileting, but is often busy. So delays in toileting resulting in people laying in their own urine and faeces. And again, that wasn't just one nurse in the report. This was for multiple nurses that were saying this. And you get a sense of how many elderly people are spending huge periods of time that are in the NHS, that are in beds, in corridors, sometimes in chairs, who are really struggling. And the lack of dignity for them, for their families, but also the difficulty for the nurses having to deal with this difficult situation as well. Now, the Royal College of Nursing General Secretary, Professor Nicola Ranger, says something urgently needs to change.
OK.
It is a disgrace, actually. I think the NHS used to be the envy of the world. I think we need to take a long, hard look at ourselves and say what needs to change. And the biggest concern for us is that the public are starting to lose a little bit of faith in their care, and that has to stop. We absolutely have to sort this out. And I think we absolutely agree with the 3 priorities of this government. But in order to move patients out of acute care into community settings, we're going to have, that will require infrastructure and investment and vital nurses.
Now, NHS England say building a health service that is fit for the future is a key priority for the NHS and government, and that the NHS is continuing to work hard to deliver improvements across urgent and emergency care for patients and staff.
OK, for now, thank you. Prime Minister is in Kiev today to sign a deal with Ukraine's President Zelensky. It's Keir Starmer's first visit to the country since becoming Prime Minister. Ukrainian MP Kira Rudik, friend of the show, joining us now live from Kiev. Hello to you. It's always great to see you. Thanks for joining us on the programme this morning. So how important is it for the Ukrainian people that people like Sir Keir Starmer come along to say hi?
Hello, Kay, and thank you so much for having me on the show. Well, we are always thrilled when the eyes of the world turn back to Ukraine, and when the Prime Minister of Britain is coming to Kiev. It's obviously a very good day from so many sides, starting from signing especially important security deals for us and getting more weapons for Ukrainian soldiers. But also when we are talking about motivation of people at the front line, that we are not forgotten, that the democratic world is standing with us, and that once Donald Trump becomes the president, it is not that Ukraine is being pushed to something, it's Ukraine, with the support of its allies, is getting to a stronger position to discuss with Donald Trump the future of Ukraine and the future of the war of Ukraine and Russia.
The 100-year partnership is what will be signed. What will it mean for both countries?
But it will mean that strategically, we will be moving together. Ukraine will be sharing its experience on the battlefield. And it's not only that the UK will support Ukraine in hard times, but Ukraine also will support the United Kingdom whenever and wherever it is possible, which includes using their experience of our army in any future battlefields that will be required. So it's like a very strategic collaboration, first and foremost in the defense sector, but it is also in economy, in education, in general development of both countries. And again, right now we are talking that Ukraine needs the support, but we know that we will pay back whenever it will be possible.
What's the situation like there at the moment?
Well, Kay, the situation is tough. Winter is always the toughest time, both at the front line and also for the people. Right now, everybody are thinking about Donald Trump and his inauguration and what's going to happen next. So they have switched their idea of ending the war in 24 hours to waiting and for the inauguration and then hoping to deliver the results over the 100 days. As our president said, it is so critical that we enter this discussion with a very strong position. And right now we think that there is lots to be done, so we will be in the strong position. And this falls onto our allies in Europe and the United Kingdom and democratic allies throughout the world to empower Ukraine right now with this kick, so we will be able to get to the discussion with Donald Trump's team as the country that has a lot of friends on our shoulder.
Just before I let you go, we have some artwork in the studio today that we wanted to share with you that has been put together by St. Mary's Ukrainian School, and it's their children's dreams that were reflected. It's obviously the colours of the Ukrainian flag, but this is just some of the images and drawings that they have done, and we'll be speaking to the Ukrainian fashion designer who's put this together. The children still have hope, don't they, despite what's happening to them every day?
Okay, thank you so much. This is such a sweet gesture. And I would like to use this opportunity from my heart to thank to all the British people, everyone who was opening their homes for Ukrainians, and for everyone who is supporting us right now in this fight. Thank you. Thank you. What you're doing is really generational, and we will remember this, and our kids and grandchildren will remember that as well. Thank you for this.
Okay, and just before I let you go, one more thing. What's happening when Trump takes power? Is that good or bad for Ukraine?
We don't know. The truth is we don't know. The truth is nobody knows what would happen. It could be either very positive or it could be somehow negative. We don't know. We need to do our homework. And this is what we are doing, our homework. And gathering our allies behind us is the homework. And Keir Starmer here today is such an amazing step in getting Ukraine into the stronger position before we talk to Donald Trump.
Okay. Thank you for taking the time, as always. Thank you.
Thank you.
Still to come on The Breakfast Show for you here on Sky News. These are the latest images from Gaza. If the Israeli government agrees later on today to the ceasefire, it will come into place on Sunday for at least 42 days. We'll be explaining what that means to you, Yaldas, in the region. Tell you all about it very shortly.
I'm Siobhan Robbins, Sky's Europe correspondent based here in Berlin.
In Sweden, police have seized a lethal stash.
Anyone of any age can say, I'll do that for £1 million and then have to go and shoot someone.
Yes. Sky News, the full story first. I'm Greg Milam and I'm Sky's Chief North of England correspondent.
This is insane. This was a bustling residential area.
I'm Yusra Al-Bagher, Sky's Africa correspondent based in Johannesburg, South Africa.
How difficult is this to police tonight? Off the scale.
I'm Dan Whitehead, Sky News' West of England and Wales correspondent.
Many people have told me that God spared my life for a reason.
President for a second time.
That reason being to save our country, he said.
A remarkable moment, isn't it?
Another chance, another 4 years. The question is, what does he do with those 4 years?
Watch the inauguration of Donald Trump as he becomes president for the second time.
So help me God.
Congratulations, Mr. President.
The full story, first on Sky News.
I'm Martha Kellner and I'm Sky's US correspondent based here in Los Angeles. Sky News, the full story first.
I'm Martin Brunt and I'm Sky's crime correspondent.
I'm David Blevins and I'm Sky's senior Ireland correspondent. I've spent 30 years reporting the journey from conflict to peace.
Free wherever you get your news. I'm Neville Lazarus and I'm Sky's reporter based in Delhi.
I'm Katie Spencer and I'm Sky News' arts and entertainment correspondent. As a team, we've interviewed some of the biggest stars in the world, the likes of Tom Cruise, Brad Pitt, Sir Elton John. We try to give you an honest sense of how these people really are.
Play Sky News.
From the Sky News Centre at 7.
Now that you're up to date, we can go into a bit more detail.
Things can change incredibly quickly.
Taken by surprise.
Have you ever known a moment like this in British politics before?
Yes.
Cheers.
We'll start with breaking news.
Let's get the latest on the ground.
So, by the end, we'll hopefully all understand what's going on in the world just that little better.
We've got your Sunday mornings covered. From the front page and the sounds of the streets to the voices of the people who make the major calls and big picture politics beyond Westminster. We'll put you at the heart of our story. A new start to Sunday. I'm ready. Are you? Join me, Trevor Phillips, Sunday mornings on Sky News.
Welcome back to the programme with me, Yalda Hakim, and I'm live here in the Qatari capital, Doha, where last night the Qatari Prime Minister announced that finally, after more than 460 days of violence and bloodshed, that there could be a cessation of hostilities following a deal that was months in the making. Well, let's speak now to Israeli government spokesperson David Mencer, who joins us live now. David, thanks very much for joining us here on the programme. As I said, this deal between Israel and Hamas was very much months in the making, but the last month was incredibly crucial. Just talk us through the kind of pressure that President-elect Donald Trump put on Benjamin Netanyahu to agree to this deal.
Good to be with you, Yalda, again. Our security cabinet will vote on this deal this afternoon, as well as the wider cabinet and the government itself. But we believe that this agreement to release our hostages, it demonstrates Israel's strength, its humanity, and also our unwavering commitment to our citizens. And it comes at a time when Hamas is at its weakest and Israel has achieved significant strategic victories against all of those who threatened our nation and our region under the auspices of Iran. President Trump, for sure, made a dramatic intervention. We are thankful to him, together with the outgoing Biden administration. Both of those administrations' commitment to the future peace of this region are absolutely key for a better future for all people in this area.
David, I've been speaking to some of the families of the hostages, and as you say, a big moment for them. They're cautiously optimistic that they will be reunited with some of their loved ones over the course of the next 42 days. But just to come back to the first point about President Trump, I mean, was it him and the incoming administration that really pushed this over the line? Because we know that the deal that has been agreed hasn't changed much from the May deal.
So, Yalda, I spoke to the negotiators. They briefed me before I came on, and I'll tell you precisely why this moment has been chosen. It's because of our military and diplomatic strength. Hamas is on the ropes, and international pressure, including President Trump's decisive stance, has created the conditions for this agreement. They also told me that up until now, Hamas have been dragging their feet. They've been going through the motions. The previous administration confirmed this. We confirm it again today. They didn't want to sign and come to an agreement. So this is Israel acting from a position of power. And also, we do this because every single Israeli life matters. Of course, all lives matter. While Hamas dehumanizes and exploits Israel, Israel saves lives, both Israeli and Gazan. And we're showing the world the stark difference between good and evil. This is an agreement. It isn't a concession, and it's a demonstration of Israel's strength and moral clarity. Hamas's days are numbered, and Gaza will be free from their terror, and Israel will continue to protect its citizens.
David, a few days ago, outgoing US Secretary of State Antony Blinken said that for all the Hamas members that had been killed, Hamas had managed to recruit that many more. Are you concerned about that and the fact that perhaps the victory that Israel was looking for, which did lead not only to the events of October 7, but beyond that, the death of more than 46,000 Palestinians, the victory of eradicating Hamas hasn't been achieved?
We believe we've massively downgraded Hamas. They are not the organization they were on October the 6th. 2023. They are massively degraded. They were firing hundreds of rockets at us every day. That is no longer the case. It's a mere trickle now. And most of all, their patron Iran, who tried to initiate a stranglehold against us, they've been pushed back. That's the key element in all of this. Iran have been greatly degraded. They're not, but in no means have been degraded.
And you say that, David, I just want to interrupt you there because you do say degraded, and as you say, we can see that in Gaza, but they haven't been destroyed, have they?
Look, Hamas has not just been Israel's enemy, it's been the enemy of the Gazan people. They've used their own ordinary citizens as human shields. They've deliberately maximized civilian casualties to fuel their propaganda. Yalda, if you think Hamas is the same organization it once was, you are severely mistaken. Yes, it's true, they do steal humanitarian aid and they sell it back to starving families at extortionate prices. They starve and exploit their own people, and their evil knows no bounds. But they have been massively degraded. At the end of the Second World War, just remember, there were still Nazis in Germany. But the Nazis, for all of their sins, they surrendered. Because Hamas are a genocidal, murderous organization, they have not surrendered. But our focus has always been number one, to bring our people home. And that is precisely what this agreement seeks to do.
Yes, and we do hope those hostages make their way home over the course of the next few weeks. And just briefly, David, is there now finally going to be some soul-searching within Israel and accountability for the security failures of October the 7th?
The government has made clear that at the end of this war, and we're waiting to bring all of our hostages home, but at the end of this war, there will be full accountability, as has been the case in previous times of this sort of security challenges that we faced here in Israel. There will be a full, independent investigation into the failures which happened on October the 7th. And of course, they were dramatic failures. But let's be clear now that Israel has fought back at a heavy cost of our own people, 840 of our own soldiers, many terrorist deaths. But Hamas have been pushed back in their corner. Hezbollah massively degraded. The Syrian people have deposed Bashar Assad himself. And Iran has had their nuclear ambitions greatly curtailed. They can no longer, their air defenses are exposed. Israel is stronger now, though it has been at a very heavy price. Our overall ambition, Yalda, is to live at peace in this region, and we're hopeful with the new Trump administration. We're looking forward to more Abraham Accords countries making normalization and peace agreements with us for a better future for all the people in this area.
David Mencer, thank you very much for your time.
Good to be with you, Yalda. Thank you.
Well, you were listening there to the Israeli government spokesperson, Kay, and this sense of cautious optimism leading up to Sunday, when we are expecting this ceasefire to take effect. But as we've been reporting, it is an incredibly complicated and detailed ceasefire agreement. It doesn't necessarily mean that at the end of this there is going to be long-term peace. That is something that this region, the leadership in this region, and they will be looking to the incoming Trump administration for support to get that over the line and look to things like normalization, which Israel is hoping with countries like Saudi Arabia. The countries in the region here have often spoken about the need for a two-state solution, for Palestinian statehood, for those normalization deals to take place. So we will be following the developments here. But for now, back to you in the studio, Kay.
OK, thank you, Yalda. Colonel Simon Diggins is here with me, just hearing there from the representative for the Israeli government saying that Hamas were on the ropes. But as Yalda was pointing out, actually, I'm just going to quote what Netanyahu said. He said that all Hamas operatives, whether above ground, underground, inside Gaza or outside Gaza, must be eliminated. Now they're saying they're on the ropes. What do you make of this deal?
It's still very conditional. I think it's the key thing I would say. I mean, we know that there's a 6-week pause now, ceasefire, during which elements of hostages will be released and Israelis will release some Palestinian prisoners. But there's plenty of opportunity, sadly, in there for it to go wrong. And I think that's what we need to be very cautious of. We hope, of course, the Israeli government is going to agree to the ceasefire and it will then start on Sunday. But not everybody within the Gazan area are necessarily going to support this. Hamas clearly have been very badly written down. I mean, the Israeli spokesman was quite correct about that. But elements of Hamas still survive. And there are also other Islamist groups within Gaza, the Palestinian Islamic Jihad, who may or may not be prepared to support that. So that's on the Palestinian side. There's also the issue around with the Israeli government where everyone's going to do what they say they're going to do there as well. So there's still things that can go very badly wrong. And the Israelis have been required by this deal to withdraw out of some of the urban areas. They'll be very reluctant to do that. And if something goes wrong, if there's an upsurge of Palestinian violence, then it could go wrong. So it's very, very conditional. I mean,
We are out of time this hour, but I know you're going to stay with me throughout the morning to talk about that in more detail, including why the Israelis have rowed back on their pledge.
Weeknights on Sky News.
This is your chance. Tell people. Welcome to the Politics Hub.
Our police force has apologised. If you want to find out about Grimsby, you come to the docks.
I'm live in Jerusalem.
Are you not concerned that that could lead to all-out war?
Hello there, good evening. There are fears of an upsurge in violence. What's at stake here?
You are watching the press preview, a first look at the front pages as they arrive.
Morning from Doha. After more than 15 months of war and nearly 50,000 deaths, the world hails a ceasefire agreement between Israel and Hamas. 33 Israeli hostages and hundreds of Palestinian prisoners should be released in the first stage of the ceasefire, which is due to start on Sunday. Despite the celebrations, the violence is still going on. At least 32 Palestinians have been killed in Israeli strikes on Gaza overnight.
Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is warning the deal isn't yet sealed. The Israeli Security Cabinet will meet later to discuss the agreement.
Also ahead on the programme for you this Thursday morning, Keir Starmer is in Kyiv this morning to show his support for Ukraine.
The Prime Minister's visit comes just days before Donald Trump arrives at the White House amid huge uncertainty about what that might mean for Russia's war.
Nurses say the NHS is in its worst state ever, with chaos in hospital corridors.
Liftoff.
And we have liftoff. Amazon founder Jeff Bezos' rocket blasts off from Cape Canaveral, ushering in a new frontier in the space race.
Good morning from Doha. In the Middle East and around the world, people are celebrating a ceasefire deal between Israel and Hamas. Israel's cabinet will meet later today to discuss the agreement reached here in Qatar, with Benjamin Netanyahu warning that the deal is not yet sealed. Well, overnight, at least 32 people have been killed by Israeli strikes on Gaza. But if the agreement holds, the guns will fall silent on Sunday.
The ceasefire agreement is in 3 phases. First, a 6-week initial ceasefire and gradual Israeli withdrawal from Gaza. In the first stage, Hamas will release 33 Israeli hostages, at least 3 every week for 6 weeks, the remaining women and children first followed by men over 50. In return, Israel will free hundreds of Palestinian prisoners, including some serving lengthy sentences. 600 truckloads of humanitarian aid will be allowed into Gaza every day of the ceasefire. If Phase 2 is agreed, all the remaining Israeli hostages will be released, with more Palestinian prisoners freed in exchange. If negotiations for Phase 3 are successful, the bodies of hostages who've died will be returned to Israel, and there'll be a 3 to 5 year reconstruction plan for Gaza.
Well, let's just show you these live images now coming in from Jerusalem, where you can see some coffins laid out with Israeli flags. This is an anti-ceasefire protest that is taking place in Jerusalem. Last night we saw celebrations in Gaza. We saw some of the hostage families demonstrating and saying they want this deal to come into effect. We're expecting at least 33 hostages to be released in the first 42 days, roughly 6 weeks once the ceasefire agreement kicks in on Sunday. But what you're looking at now are live images coming in from Jerusalem of demonstrations against this ceasefire deal. Well, in a moment, we'll get the very latest from our correspondent Alex Rossi, who is in Jerusalem for us. But first, this report from my colleague Alistair Bunkle.
Finally, after 467 days of war, a ceasefire has been agreed between Israel and Hamas. Within minutes of the news breaking, there were celebrations across Gaza. They were dancing in the streets of Khan Yunis, a city that has been almost totally flattened over the many months of fighting.
All citizens feel relieved and happy with the news of the ceasefire, and we hope to return to our homes, villages and cities as soon as possible.
We have been waiting for this happiness for a year and a half. No one can feel the feeling that we are experiencing now, an indescribable feeling.
In Tel Aviv, where weekly demonstrations calling for a deal had brought the streets to a standstill, they lit candles and finally started to hope that their relatives would be coming home soon. And in Doha, where the negotiations have been taking place, the Qatari Prime Minister said that they will work to make sure that the deal sticks.
We are committed. We will continue to do everything we can, everything possible, together with our partners to ensure that this deal is implemented as it's agreed. And this deal will bring us peace, hopefully, at the end of it. I believe that it all depends on the parties of the agreement and acting in good faith in that agreement in order to ensure that no collapse happening to that deal.
And in Washington, it was welcomed by the outgoing US President Joe Biden, whose officials have spent so many hours and days to reach this moment.
There was no other way for this war to end than with a hostage deal. And I'm deeply satisfied this day has finally come, for the sake of the people of Israel and the families waiting in agony, and for the sake of the innocent people in Gaza who suffered unimaginable devastation because of the war. The Palestinian people have gone through hell. Too many innocent people have died. Too many communities have been destroyed. In this deal, the people of Gaza can finally recover and rebuild. They can look to a future without Hamas in power.
The deal will need to be ratified by Israel's Security Cabinet. It is expected to be approved. Many in Israel are against the deal because it doesn't guarantee the release of all the hostages in the first phase, and because Hamas is not defeated in Gaza.
Today we affirm that the occupation has failed to defeat our people and our resistance. They achieved nothing but destruction, massacres and war crimes against our people. They could not take their captives by force. They could only get them back through a negotiated deal with the resistance in exchange for a ceasefire and a dignified prisoner swap.
Even as the negotiations were continuing in Doha, the fighting carried on in Gaza. This was an airstrike early on Wednesday morning. The ceasefire will come into force this Sunday. The coming days will be a mix of anticipation and tension, as both sides try to make final military gains, whilst their citizens count down the hours to peace. But after so many months, so many thousands dead, and so many failed attempts to end the war, there is now an end in sight. Alistair Bunkle, Sky News, in Jerusalem.
Let's just show you these live pictures now coming in from Jerusalem. Pictures of coffins laid out with Israeli flags. This is an anti-ceasefire demonstration that is taking place this morning in Jerusalem. As Ali was saying there, many people in Israel are against this deal because in the first phase, at least, we're being told that there are going to be about 33 hostages that are going to be released over the course of 42 days. And there are, in total, 98 hostages still being held in Gaza. It's unclear how many of them are alive at this stage. But this is an anti-ceasefire demonstration. Let's also show you some images coming in from Gaza this morning as well. As Ali was saying in his report, the airstrikes continue. They continued overnight, where dozens of people were killed. And the cessation of hostilities doesn't actually come into force until Sunday. So the people of Gaza, while they were celebrating last night, they're all too aware that the bombardment does continue until the guns fall silent on Sunday. But there is also a very nervous wait because there is concern that between now and Sunday, anything could happen. Well, earlier I spoke to Israeli government spokesperson David Mencer, and I asked him why the ceasefire deal has only been agreed to now. Why this moment? Have a listen.
Hamas is on the ropes, and international pressure, including President Trump's decisive stance, has created the conditions for this agreement. They also told me that up until now, Hamas have been dragging their feet. They've been going through the motions. The previous administration confirmed this. We confirm it again today. They didn't want to sign and come to an agreement. So this is Israel acting from a position of power. And also, we do this because every single Israeli life matters. Of course, all lives matter. While Hamas dehumanizes and exploits Israel, Israel saves lives, both Israeli and Gazan. And we're showing the world the stark difference between good and evil.
Spokesperson David Mencer speaking to me earlier. Let's speak now to our international correspondent Alex Rossi, who joins us live from Jerusalem. And Alex, we're just looking at some of the live images because, as we were hearing in Ali's report, not everyone in Israel is satisfied and happy with this deal. They want all of the hostages to come out. Roughly 98 of the hostages still remain in Gaza. And also images coming out of Gaza this morning, which also shows the reality, the fact that Gaza is completely flattened and the bombardment does continue there as well.
Yeah, within Israel, it is a divisive issue whether or not to bring about this ceasefire. I think to understand what you're seeing happening in Jerusalem with that anti-ceasefire rally, you need to kind of row back to October the 7th and understand the psychological impact that the Hamas attack had on this country. There are many people in this country who think actually the job isn't finished yet. Hamas have not been defeated, and until they are entirely obliterated, which may very well be unrealistic, the war should continue. How divided Israeli society is difficult to say. Certainly there is a huge body of pressure on Prime Minister Netanyahu to bring about a conclusion to this war, which has raged now for many months and seen huge destruction across Gaza. The hostages, of course, are key to that from the Israeli perspective. They are still locked inside Gaza, and until they are home, many people here will not be satisfied. But that ceasefire agreement, perhaps, Yada, the best way to see it, is not actually as a permanent ceasefire, because it's not, but more a cessation of hostilities subject to further negotiations. It is conditional, and much, of course, could still go wrong. The Israeli Security Cabinet is going to meet later to discuss it, and we are expecting they will take a vote on the agreement. But that Security Cabinet, we should also stress, is also divided over this agreement. It is expected, though, that they will vote it through.
Alex, thank you so much for bringing us up to date there from Jerusalem. Well, Kay, you really get a sense of just how fragile and precarious this deal actually is. And as Alex Rossi was saying there, it's not a permanent ceasefire as such. There are multiple phases to this, the first one lasting about 6 weeks, and we're expecting about 33 hostages to be released. Women, if there are any children, the elderly, the sick will come out in that first phase. And then there are multiple phases that could go on for months. There is so much that could still go wrong. But between now and Sunday, so many people affected by this war, by this conflict in Gaza, as well as in Israel, are holding their breath. It's a nervous wait until it kicks in on Sunday. For now, back to you in the studio, Kay.
OK, Yalda, thank you. Meantime, let me tell you about Sir Keir Starmer. He's in Kyiv this morning on his first visit to Ukraine as Prime Minister. Deborah standing by for us in the Dnipro region. Good morning to you, Deborah. What's the plan?
Good morning. Yes, so the Prime Minister has finally arrived in Ukraine 6 months since he took over that job. That's been a bit of a surprise for some people that it's taken him so long to come here. But he's coming with this plan. He's going to be meeting with the Ukrainian president, and they'll be signing what Downing Street is calling a landmark 100-year partnership that's all about deepening security ties between the two countries, defence ties, and also other areas too, such as science and technology, and saying that this whole deal is about ensuring to support Ukraine's long-term security, so the country isn't vulnerable to the kind of brutality unleashed by Russia's war. But the problem is those warm words are doing very little to actually stop the war that's happening right now and the brutality that's being unleashed across the country by Russia's invasion. And it's all coming ahead of Donald Trump's arrival at the White House, and massive uncertainty about what that's going to mean for the course of the war. The incoming president has vowed to end the fighting He's made very clear that he is not a huge supporter for the massive military support that the US under Joe Biden has given to Ukraine. Absolutely critical in Ukraine being able to withstand Russia's advances and in areas push them back. But the war is still raging hard. The Ukrainians are trying to trying to hold the line and push the Russians back amid warnings that there could be some attempt to impose a deal. And what Volodymyr Zelensky really wants is more weapons, not warm words.
OK, for now, thanks very much indeed. Thank you. Let's talk about the economy again this morning. 2 days on the bounce. More good news for the government.
It is good news, but qualified good news.
Yeah.
GDP, measure of growth. The UK economy has returned to growth after a couple of months of negative growth. The economy grew by 0.1%. Percentage point in November, effectively flatlining. Look at the broader trend. The UK economy is the same size in November, was the same size as it was in July. And what happened in July? There was a general election. So this is firmly under Labour's watch. And after 2 quarters, the first half of the year, there was some economic growth, albeit modest, 0.7%, 0.5%. It's now flatlining. Now, the reason for this uplift was services did quite well. Actually, the health service being busy contributes to GDP. You might not think of that as contributing growth, but it all counts. The expectation among economists was 0.2%. So yesterday we were talking about inflation being better than expected. Today we've got GDP lower than expected. These are tiny numbers. And the economy is actually bumping on a point or two, bumping on either side of zero, which is not good. And the challenge for the Chancellor of the Exchequer is all of this is on her watch. I've just been to see the Chancellor on behalf of all the broadcasters for a short interview, and this is her reaction.
The truth is the British economy has barely grown for the last 14 years, and that's why we had a cost of living crisis and why British people are worse off. This new government has come in with a determination, a #1 mission to grow the economy. That takes time, but it's why this week the Prime Minister announced the AI Action Plan to take advantage of the huge opportunities of new technology. It's why yesterday we announced investment in housing and infrastructure, foreign direct investment in Bristol. It's why today the Business Secretary is announcing inward investment in the car manufacturing sector in Sunderland. And it's why I announced a deal this week to help British business export more to China, the second biggest economy in the world. But we need to do more to grow our economy to make British people better off.
Kevin Hollinrake is with me this morning, Shadow Secretary of State for Levelling Up Housing and Communities. What did you make of what the Chancellor had to say?
Good morning. Listen, I welcome any growth in the economy, because that's not what we've seen over the previous months since they took over. When Rachel Reeves took over this economy, it was the fastest growing in the G7, as your correspondent just said. Now it is the slowest growing economy in the G7. Rachel Reeves seems to think she can grow the economy. She doesn't grow the economy. Regulators don't grow the economy. Businesses grow the economy. And what Rachel Reeves has done since taking over is 6 months of gloom and doom about the economy, which was nonsense, and then hit businesses with £25 billion a year tax rises and more regulation, the Employment Rights Bill, which will really put huge burdens on businesses. So, of course, we all want growth. We welcome any growth. But Rachel Reeves and Keir Starmer are going about it in completely the wrong way.
Talk to me about the Renters Reform Bill. I was reading in my copy of The Independent that you hold shares in a company which opposed the Renters Reform Bill. Is that right?
No, it isn't, actually. I sold those shares before the budget because I knew it would be a disastrous budget. But I've never, ever sought to, although I was in business before politics, and I've made that very clear, and all that is declared, of course, I've never sought to look after my own interests since being in government. I've tried to look after the interests of consumers, which includes tenants. The Renters' Rights Bill will really be very damaging for tenants because it'll reduce supply into the market and drive up rents. And that's what we've seen in Scotland, where we've done exactly the same measures. And now what we're seeing in Scotland, not only can landlords not ask tenants to leave at the end of a contract, They can't do that anymore. Also, they're introducing rent controls, which will further limit the supply into the market, which will be very, very bad for tenants.
OK, well, thanks for clarifying as far as the shares are concerned. But how can it not be a good thing for the responsibilities of landlords to become more defined?
That's not a bad thing. And we've always said, and the Leader of the Opposition, Kemi Badenoch, said that we are supportive of more rights for tenants. When you put more regulations in, though, don't put regulations in that are going to make life worse for tenants. And you can have all the regulations in the world around renting a house, but if there's no houses to rent, then what good is that? And that's the problem. What will happen, as has happened in Scotland, there's been a 10% reduction in the supply into the private rented sector in Scotland since those new measures were brought in. And now they're doing the same in England. It's completely wrong. It'll be followed by rent controls, which will deter landlords from investing in the marketplace, investing in more properties that people want to rent. That cannot be good.
Where are you on no-fault evictions?
Well, as I say, it's our view that, of course, most landlords don't want their tenant to leave because they want the rent. But if a landlord owns a property and needs it back and it's within their contractual obligations, or the tenant's contractual obligations to leave that property at the end of a term, then a landlord should be able to serve notice on a tenant.
It was Theresa May, I think, some 6 years ago, perhaps even longer, when she said, you know what, we don't want these no-fault evictions. She's going to ban them. We also heard previous housing secretaries talking about that as well. And yet here we are 6 years later, and they're still in place.
Well, it's fair to say that the Leader of the Opposition, Kemi Badenoch, has a different view on that, because if you stop a landlord from saying to a tenant, particularly a tenant that's not paying their rent or damaging a property or guilty of antisocial behaviour, from evicting that tenant, that cannot be a good thing. It'll be many landlords, particularly landlords who own a few properties, or somebody who wants to rent their property because they're moving to different parts of the country or a different part of the world. If you say to those landlords, you cannot get your property back in those circumstances, or it'll take 9 months to get that tenant out at a point where they're not paying the rent, then the landlords will be less willing to rent their property, which won't be good for those tenants. That's the natural consequence of saying to a landlord they can't evict a tenant in those circumstances.
So, just to clarify, you are in favour of no-fault evictions?
I'm in favour of a landlord being able to set a term for a tenancy, and at the end of that tenancy, give notice to that tenant to leave.
But you can see how that might be abused.
Well, generally, it's not abused.
No, 80-odd%.
Well, I say you can put all the controls in place you want for a tenant, and the right controls, decent home standard, things like that, I'm totally in favour of. But if all the controls in the world, if a tenant cannot find a property to rent, then what good is that? And when in my early days, I was a estate agent in my background, 30 years in business before politics. Back in the mid-80s, when you went to rent a house in York, where I first started up, there was no choice. Your choice was probably from a couple of dark, dingy terraced houses, because no landlords would invest in the marketplace. Today, you've got 4 or 5 million properties available in the UK to rent. There's a huge amount of supply, and that's provided by landlords who are incentivised to invest because they've got control over the letting of that property. You take away control, landlords won't invest, it'll reduce supply, which is not good for tenants and not good for the economy.
Are you confident that this government is going to be able to build as many homes as it's promised during its first tenure?
No, it won't build 1.5 million homes. I wish it could, and we wish it well, because we need to build more homes. And during our tenure, in the last 5 years, we built record numbers of houses, a 50-year record in terms of the number of houses over the last decade before we left office. But 1.5 million is a very big step up. And there's many things that the government is planning to do which are good, but it'll take a while to put those measures in place. So you won't get the immediate uplift from that if they get these measures right in the first place. At the same time as wanting more houses being delivered, they're reorganising local government right across the country. Every council, every two-tier council in the country is being abolished. So all those people who work for those councils, including the planning officers, will have to reapply for their jobs. It's not a recipe for an acceleration in planning consents, which are fundamental to what's happening in terms of the housing market. So I'm sure they'll miss those targets, but we want them to succeed, because that's good in terms of people's choice to be able to get on the housing ladder and be able to rent a house that they want to rent.
Are you pleased to see Keir Starmer in Kyiv this morning?
Yes. about time. I mean, 6 months, and he's not been there yet. But there's this 100-year partnership.
He would say he's too busy fixing the mess that you left behind.
Well, he would say that, wouldn't he? But the reality is, as I say, we're the fastest growing economy in the G7. Now we're the slowest, and that's all because of the crisis made in Downing Street. But yeah, listen, I welcome Keir Starmer going to Ukraine. We started this 100-year partnership, which is both an economic and a security partnership to make sure what has happened in Ukraine can't happen again. We very much hope there'll be a settlement to what happens in Ukraine, and that terrible war will end. But and that's got to be because of the support of the UK and the US and the rest of the Western world. So we of course support Ukraine and will continue to do so until this conflict ends.
And how do you feel about the new president taking office on Monday in the US?
Well, I think I'm very supportive of America making its choices in terms of who he elects as the president. And
we've got with all sorts of tariffs, though, isn't he?
Well, it's very important that we make the right decisions in terms of we should look to the West. We should look to the US as being the most important trading partner, our biggest trading partner, biggest single trading nation. I'm very worried that what the government's currently doing is looking east, looking at China.
Can't they look both ways?
Well, I think it's very difficult to do that with President Trump's position. And so the US is our biggest trading partner, yet you've seen Keir Starmer, you've seen David Lammy, you've seen Rachel Reeves kind of going cap in hand to China in terms of trying to bridge that relationship with there. I think the most important relationship.
You guys didn't work on it, did you, when you were in power?
Well, but there are concerns around China. There are concerns about security. There are also real concerns about how it rigs the game in terms of its trading relationship. It subsidised businesses.
Just said Trump's just about to rig the game.
Property. Well, I don't think he'll rig the game with us if we have the right trading relationship.
He puts tariffs in place,
the right approach. Well, let's see if they do. But certainly having that kind of very close relationship with China is not likely to make President Trump less likely to impose
So you think we should ignore them?
In China? Yeah. I think we treat them with real caution, I think, is what we should do. We've got to make sure that UK businesses work on a fair and level playing field. That's not always the case with China. But it is the case, I think, if we can strike a trade deal with the US. And I think we can do that if we make the right approaches. But I think running off to China, cap in hand, after with a very small deal in terms of some trade with China,
it's not a great deal.
That Rachel Reeves has come back trumpeting, I think it's quite embarrassing.
It's about 600 million quid. It's not a lot of money,
is it?
It's good to see you. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Let's show you a new frontier in the space race. Here we go.
Lift off.
Jeff Bezos' Blue Origin rocket has lifted off from Cape Canaveral in Florida. It's the first test flight for the ship called New Glenn after a planned launch was called off on Monday. The 98-metre rocket has been long in the making with heavy funding from the Amazon founder. Why is it called New Glenn? Stay tuned and we'll tell you after the break.
I'm Stuart Ramsey, and I'm Sky's chief correspondent.
An enormous explosion has just come down. I think it was a monster just landed in between us.
Hundreds and hundreds of people hoping to get north, ultimately to get to the United States.
It's a border where they're not welcome, yet they keep coming.
We saw snatch squads going in, grabbing people, taking them out and putting them into trucks, but taking them away.
They make about 50 kilos of fentanyl a week. It's incredibly dangerous and toxic stuff.
There's been an upsurge in deaths. The fighting between the gangs is getting more and more vicious.
Is this now all your territory?
Yeah. The battlefield is outside the barricades, which is over there. This is much more like a normal town. It's really sending a clear message that Venezuela is eager for change. We're being crushed.
Free from wherever you get your news. We are in the middle of a forest, in a jungle really, and they're attempting to keep these men alive. This is real, hardcore emergency medicine.
The information on this could bring down the entire network, not just in Iraq and Syria, but across the world.
Sky News, the full story first. Hundreds of thousands of people have been using the beast for years to traverse Mexico, but it is really dangerous. Many people have died riding it. I'm James Matthews, and I'm Sky's US correspondent, based here in Washington, D.C. Donald Trump, it would appear, is about to learn his fate. There's no doubting the strength of this hurricane as it roars through. Sky News, get the full story first. Do you fear a fourth indictment?
He's from Sky News. He's from Sky News. He's entitled to ask me questions.
There's always more to the news than a headline. We want to discover, to delve a little deeper, to find out what's really going on. Explanation, analysis, the people at the heart of every story. I'm Neil Patterson, and this is the Sky News Daily Podcast. So, by the end, we'll hopefully all understand what's going on in the world just that little better. Available wherever you get your podcasts.
Tobias and Simon are with us this morning. Before the break, I was asking why the new rocket, the Bezos rocket, was called... Hey, let's have a quick listen.
Lift off.
It's the Blue Origin rocket. It's lifted off from Cape Canaveral in Florida. Should originally have gone on Monday. Went this morning, a couple of hours ago. It's called the New Glenn rocket. I thought I was being very clever. And I said to Tobias, do you know why it's called the New Glenn rocket? And of course he knew. Why is it called that?
John Glenn was the first American astronaut in space. And it was part of that space race, the Cold War, if you like. And much as this is a celebration, which is fantastic, I'm afraid on the side of this, there is a concern of the weaponization of space, and that's actually what's happening next. So this is fantastic to see another commercial operation take off in this way. But there's a big whole debate about the rules of space, because there aren't any rules of space, and all sorts of things are going on out there which people can't see.
Yeah, the Chinese are up to all sorts. That's a discussion for another day. What we want to talk about today, though, Simon, is this deal, ceasefire, that should come into place on Sunday, but it's not yet been ratified by the Israeli government.
No, it hasn't. Their cabinet's meeting at the moment, and their hope is that their cabinet will agree it this afternoon. There's another phase, which is that part of the deal is the release of a significant number of Palestinian prisoners, including some who have been convicted of terrorist offences, up to including murder.
But not in relation to the 7th of October.
Not in relation to 7th of October. And the families who are victims of those terrorist attacks have got a right to appeal against it. So there are conditions even to get to the stage where it starts on Sunday, and then we've got the whole set of the conditions then. Will both sides behave and actually agree and maintain, sustain the terms of the ceasefire over the first period, the first 16 days of it? So it's heading in the right direction. The deal's been around for 8 months.
Yeah.
But we're still not quite there yet, and we just hope that both sides can see the big picture and go for that, rather than some of the inevitable challenges and disruptions that is probably going to come their way.
At the time, Netanyahu said that he would not stop until Hamas was eliminated. The Americans have made him see differently?
Potentially. Certainly Trump coming here has focused people's minds. But also I think that Hamas is a depleted force. Don't forget what supported Hamas was also Iran, and they've been diminished in their power, as have the Houthis and Hezbollah, of course. So many occasions that we've discussed where this could have spilled out into a more general war. So I think there'll be huge relief on all sides. But as you've been indicating, the challenges ahead are absolutely huge. It's not even signed yet, and the war is still continuing. There's 2 million people displaced in Gaza. It is in ruins, and there's going to have to be a massive international effort. I think there'll be a donors conference and so forth, even a third-party force, if you like, which Britain could participate in to create a buffer zone to give Israelis security, to make sure that those barbaric attacks that took place on the 7th of October are never repeated.
Biden would say it was his deal. Trump's representative would say something different, as we're just hearing there from Tobias. He arrived, I believe, on the Sabbath. They said, oh, we can't talk about it today. He said, open the door, in I come. And then he went over to Qatar to discuss it further there. Who do you think is responsible for this?
So the lineaments of this deal, the basic elements of the deal have been in place for over 8 months. And what's needed was additional bits of pressure. And Tobias is right. You know, the external circumstances around this, the role of Iran, the role of Hezbollah, even the role of the Houthis, which was basically sustaining Hamas, have basically fundamentally changed. And that's a result of the fighting that has taken place. But the basic deal has been there for a while. I mean, I think when they're being generous, the two American administrations, if you like, the current one and the incoming one, talked about it being a one-team effort. And then Trump got on Twitter first and said it was me what done it. It's good to see that they've been able to work together on this, and there has been a significant amount of diplomacy from the current administration and also from Steve Witkoff, who was Trump's envoy into that area to try and bring this about. So I think we should just. I think that's one for American politics as to where it is. I mean, we've got there, and I think that's it. We hope.
Yeah.
But I think that's where it is, yeah.
And as far as the wider region is concerned, Turkey, Saudi Arabia are becoming major players, aren't they?
Oh, completely. I mean, the entire Middle East has changed. We've seen the fall of Assad as well. So what happens there? Big question mark. New president for Lebanon, and that's good news as well. But let's not diminish the challenges that Gaza, Israel, West Bank and so forth still continue to face, because Hamas, the ideology has not been destroyed. The Americans are suggesting that actually the Hamas's ranks, despite all those fighters being killed, are back up to their original numbers because they've been able to recruit. So the challenges that were there prior to the start of this phase of the war remain. So they're absolutely huge. But the fact that we've got the Trump administration working with the Biden administration, I think, was absolutely critical. I remember back when the American hostages, caught up in the Iranian Revolution, you may remember that Carter wanted to announce that they were going to be freed, and it was delayed until Reagan came in, and then they were finally freed. To see the two working, I think, was very, very important indeed.
That was in the 70s?
In the late 70s, after
79
after the revolution.
Yeah, I remember it like it was yesterday. But if this ceasefire does hold for the first 6 weeks, and then more going forward, and more hostages are released, more prisoners are released, the IDF moves out of Gaza, or certainly to the border, potentially with a buffer zone there between Israel and Gaza. What about the politics? You touched on it there. What about the politics in the region going forward?
Well, as Tobias said, there is the hope of some of the regional powers. I talked about the Abrahamic Accords, which was prior to October the 7th, 2023. There was the idea that Israel would have an agreement with Saudi Arabia, which is there. But there's also the issue of what the Palestinian state might look like after that. And we've heard absolutely nothing from that about it. But some version of the two-state solution, I think, is still required.
I have to stop you guys. Sure. Let me tell you that we've just heard that, according to the Prime Minister's office in Israel, Israel will not set a date for a cabinet and government meeting until the mediators announce that Hamas has approved all the details of the agreement. So there's a hiccup right there.
Ouch. Yes. Yeah. And this actually reflects the difficulties that Netanyahu, even if he wanted to push this through, and he's delayed it himself because many think that there'll be a reckoning for him, given domestic politics, that will follow once an agreement is in place.
Today, actually.
Yeah, and what we're seeing is, I think a number of his cabinet have suggested that they might quit if they sign the deal as well. So the domestic side of this, very, very difficult indeed. There's also, I think, both sides trying to play a little bit of politics, showing that they are the winners, that they somehow can claim victory here in this deal. I still hope that President Biden, President Trump will exert greater pressure to make sure that Sunday we see the ceasefire actually commence.
This is potentially a massive setback, though, isn't it?
It's really sad because we're so close to this in terms of bringing this forward, but there's always been the element within this whole conflict about the internal Israeli politics, Netanyahu's own personal position, and what he saw about the future of Israel, and indeed his attitude towards Palestinian self-determination, some Palestinian statehood, and I think that's what's come to the fore here.
So the Prime Minister's office is saying Hamas is backing out of the understandings and creating a last-minute crisis that prevents a settlement. Hamas is backing out of the explicit understandings agreed upon with the mediators, and Israel in a last-minute blackmail attempt.
is this just noise being made to show, so they
You're a
don't lose
politician, or
face?
previously a politician. What do you think?
Or is it something absolutely serious? We won't know until we have comment from the international community as well. But as we've been discussing, never have we been so close to getting a ceasefire. And I think every effort will be made, pressure will be exerted by the international community to make sure that this does land on Sunday.
OK, let's bring in Alex Drossi, come back to you in just a second. Alex, do you think this is a bit of sabre-rattling by the Israeli government, or is it something much more challenging than that?
Well, I think it is really hard to decipher exactly what is going on. A lot of what has gone on in the background has been quite impenetrable and difficult to read. But I think, Kay, what it speaks to is just how delicate this agreement is. We're talking about it as a ceasefire. At best, really, it's a cessation of hostilities, certainly in its initial phase, but very, very difficult to read. I mean, what is clear, though, is that the Israeli cabinet are continuing to play hardball, saying that they will not meet until these difficulties have been ironed out and Hamas has gone back to the mediators and said, actually, we are going to keep our part of the bargain. But again, it shows just how delicate all of this remains.
And how much of a challenge is the Israeli Prime Minister facing at home at the moment? You've been bringing us some demonstrations that have been on the streets earlier on today, and we were also hearing from our panel here that some of his cabinet threatening to resign.
Yeah, I mean, look, this ceasefire in itself is an enormously divisive issue in Israel. To what extent it sways to each side is very difficult to gauge. But we have seen anti-ceasefire protests this morning in Jerusalem. There are many people here who believe that the job is not yet finished, and actually the war needs to be continued to be prosecuted to obliterate Hamas. And I think really to understand that, you need to go back to the psychological blow that was October the 7th. The security that Israel had set up as a kind of fortress nation was shattered with that event. You saw widespread attacks in southern Israel, massive loss of life, the kidnapping of hostages. Those hostages, many of them still remain inside Gaza. So there are people who are saying, actually, we shouldn't end this war now. We should keep up the military pressure on Hamas and continue to degrade until they no longer exist as a threat. That hasn't actually happened. Hamas, we understand, is still managing to recruit sizable numbers of fighters, and it is still a fighting force. But on the other hand, we have seen, weekly protests in Israel, focused in Tel Aviv, trying to exert pressure on Prime Minister Netanyahu to conclude the war and bring the hostages back. Many people here have said since the very beginning that the priority should not be the war. There will be a time for war later, but it shall be bringing back the hostages. So an enormous amount of pressure on Prime Minister Netanyahu to conclude the war. And also remember as well, Kay, internationally things are changing as well. We have President-elect Trump coming into office very shortly. We know that he has exerted pressure on Benjamin Netanyahu to bring about a ceasefire. His envoy has come here, and I think had a pretty tough conversation with the Prime Minister to try and get this deal across the line. But as we are seeing, there still remain issues that are yet to be resolved.
Yeah, Alex, Tobias wanted to share his thought with you about President Trump and what's coming up.
Well, Donald Trump has been spending 4 years trying to get back into the White House. This is his weekend. He will not want nothing to rain on his parade. So I think he'll be privately deeply angry to hear that there's any hiccups or setbacks, and he will exert his pressure on his side to say, get that deal done. Do not absolutely interfere with my inauguration because it's my moment.
I'm guessing you agree with that, Alex?
Yeah, I mean, Donald Trump has made it quite clear privately, certainly, that he wants to not only take the win, he will say he's managed to get a deal across the line that President Biden didn't manage to do, despite the fact that this deal looking very much like the one that President Biden proposed in late May. And he also wants to get on with other stuff. He doesn't want to have this as a #1 priority in his intro when he takes office. So, yeah, he will not want this to spoil his inauguration.
OK, Alex, for now, thank you. Simon, we've just got some pictures reaching us here at Sky Centre, and this is the skyline in Gaza. Let's have a look at that. And it looks as though with the smoke billowing there over the Gaza skyline that the attacks are continuing, at least for now. Of course, the ceasefire not due to come into place until Sunday at the earliest, but 32 people at least already killed since the announcement was made last night.
No, I think Israel is probably going to try and use, however grimly, these last 3 or 4 days to continue to try and kill Hamas. It's got its mission, which is to eliminate Hamas. You can't kill an idea, and this is what's completely missing from the Israeli strategy. You can defeat them militarily, but you can't deal with the issue, which is that the Palestinian people, particularly people of Gaza, want not to be ruled by Israel or to be under threat. And nothing, except for this rather vague view at the end of the ceasefire process of a sustainable peace has been put in place to bring that about. So I think the fighting sadly will continue right up to the moment if we get the ceasefire as we hope we will.
You're talking about Trump. Another leader that never wants to lose face is Netanyahu. He said at the time when he was talking about Hamas, whether above ground, underground, inside Gaza or outside Gaza, Hamas must be eliminated. Now we're being told they're on the ropes. How does he save face with that?
This is a difficulty. This is why some of his cabinet are saying actually Hamas haven't been destroyed. Certainly the ideology absolutely remains, because the bigger picture, the two-state solution, is not back on the table. And that is the challenge that Israel now actually faces. Can they endure further war? And as I mentioned, Netanyahu is facing other reckonings because of what he's been up to domestically as well. So huge challenges remain. These are the questions that I think the international community needs to assist with. What will be the governance structure of Gaza and indeed the West Bank moving forward? What will be the security apparatus that will be there that will be satisfactory to Israel and indeed to Gaza too? I hope that there will be some form of conference that brings all these parties together, but it's contingent on the start of the ceasefire on Sunday, and I hope nothing that we've heard today is going to affect that.
OK. It's great to talk to you, gentlemen. Thank you very much indeed for joining us, as always. Thank you. We just heard the breaking news within the last few moments as it relates to the latest situation in Gaza. We were expecting a ceasefire to come into place by Sunday, is what we were being told. It did need to be ratified by the Israeli government, and we're hearing Israel, according to the Prime Minister's office, Israel will not set a date for a cabinet and government meeting until the mediators announce that Hamas has approved all the details of the agreement. What does that mean for the hostages? What does that mean for the people of Gaza? Stay tuned for more.
I'm Siobhan Robbins, Sky's Europe correspondent based here in Berlin.
In Sweden, police have seized a lethal stash.
Anyone of any age could say, I'll do that for £1 million and then have to go and shoot someone.
Yes. Sky News, the full story first. I'm Greg Milam and I'm Sky's Chief North of England correspondent.
This is insane. This was a bustling residential area.
I'm Yusra Al-Bagher, Sky's Africa correspondent based in Johannesburg, South Africa.
How difficult is this to police tonight? Off the scale.
I'm Dan Whitehead, Sky News' West of England and Wales correspondent.
Many people have told me that God spared my life for a reason.
President for a second time.
That reason being to save our country, he said.
A remarkable moment, isn't it?
Another chance, another 4 years. The question is, what does he do with those 4 years?
Watch the inauguration of Donald Trump as he becomes president for the second time.
So help me God.
Congratulations, Mr. President.
The full story, first on Sky News.
I'm Martha Kellner and I'm Sky's US correspondent based here in Los Angeles. Sky News, the full story first.
I'm Martin Brunt and I'm Sky's crime correspondent.
I'm David Blevins and I'm Sky's senior Ireland correspondent. I've spent 30 years reporting the journey from conflict to peace.
Free wherever you get your news. I'm Neville Lazarus and I'm Sky's reporter based in Delhi.
I'm Katie Spencer and I'm Sky News' arts and entertainment correspondent. As a team, we've interviewed some of the biggest stars in the world, the likes of Tom Cruise, Brad Pitt, Sir Elton John. We try to give you an honest sense of how these people really are.
Play Sky News.
From the Sky News Centre at 7.
Now that you're up to date, we can go into a bit more detail.
Things can change incredibly quickly.
Taken by surprise.
Have you ever known a moment like this in British politics before? Yes. Cheers.
We'll start with breaking news.
Let's get the latest on the ground.
So, by the end, we'll hopefully all understand what's going on in the world just that little better.
We've got your Sunday mornings covered. From the front page and the sounds of the streets to the voices of the people who make the major calls and big picture politics beyond Westminster. We'll put you at the heart of our story. A new start to Sunday.
I'm ready. Are you?
Join me, Trevor Phillips, Sunday mornings on Sky News.
Hello again, everybody. Welcome back to The Breakfast Show here on Sky News. Big day on Monday in the United States. That is when we see the new president, the old new president, coming into office. Again, President Trump, of course, talking about it in more detail. Maya Juliana Robbins, American living in London, and also Margaret Mitchell, a journalist at The Spectator. It's good to see you both, ladies. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. I will always love it when it's an all-female panel. Situation in Gaza, let's talk about that first of all. We were expecting a ceasefire to be in place on Sunday. We're just hearing from the Israeli cabinet, the Israeli Prime Minister's office, that is not going to be ratified yet because there have been some last-minute issues with Hamas. If it does go ahead, which president do you think was more responsible for getting it over the line?
Well, I think Biden is the present president, and he was mostly responsible for it. And he discussed this in his farewell speech, that he has access to the current foreign policy sort of levers of power. He has access to the State Department right now. I do think Trump had some influence on it. I think the shifting of power in the U.S. definitely has influenced that. But ultimately, it was Biden who was in charge of the U.S. Foreign Service at the time.
So. I mean, I think Trump would love to take full credit for this, but it is telling that this is happening just days before he is being inaugurated. I know that his incoming Middle East envoy has been very vocal in Israel with trying to get the ceasefire put through. But I mean, Maya is partially right that this has all happened under Biden. But I mean, if you look at the situations and the scenarios that led to this war happening in the first place, I think there is an argument that Biden is somewhat responsible for those.
Yeah, certainly it's a deal that's been more or less there in its present form for the last 8 months. But it's equally fair to say that Trump and his envoy went banging on the door to say, come on, let's sort this out. Talk to me about what's going to happen on Monday. What sort of presidential inauguration might we see, and what message is it sending? I believe that later on in the evening, village people are going to perform YMCA.
Well, what's really fascinating to me about this inauguration, as opposed to the last one, is the artistic boycott and the sort of way people in popular media have reacted is very different. In 2016, there was this sort of mass rejection of Trump that isn't present in the same way. Like, for example, Carrie Underwood, you've mentioned the village people, they're willing to perform at this inauguration. Previously, Trump couldn't even get a Bruce Springsteen cover band. So I think it's become more acceptable to sort of support Trump in this way. And so the inauguration is going to reflect this, and I think the turnout will also reflect that.
Why do you think that is?
Well, I think that there's been a sort of, I don't know, you would like to call it a vibe shift, but there's a lot of sort of disruptors coming in. You have Elon Musk, you have Mark Zuckerberg, you have Jeff Bezos, you have all of these people who have sort of jumped on the Trump train and are coming to Washington to kiss the ring. And I do think that there's been, over the last 4 years, maybe even 8 years, people have sort of become a lot more tired of the status quo of the progressives, of the sort of like boycotting anything that you don't like, and that's coming to an end.
What sort of president do you think he'll be?
I mean, we've seen what kind of president he was in the first term. I think it's going to be roughly a continuation of that. But in the first term, there were a lot of legacy Republicans that were around. When he was assembling his cabinet, it was from the Republican Party. But now he's really assembling a cabinet from the party of Trump. So I think he's going to be a lot more enabled. He feels much more of a mandate with how the election turned out. He's won the popular vote this time. So I think it will be an intensification of what the 2016 term was like.
He's been criticised for filling his cabinet with billionaires. He says in response, they're very successful at what they do. That's why they are in my cabinet. Do you think he's going to continue on from where he left off? Or?
I think he's going to be a lot more daring. I mean, if you just look at the people... I mean, if you look at the people that he's already selected for his cabinet that are going through their hearings right now, if you look at his rhetoric about Greenland, like, he doesn't have another election coming up after this. These are his last 4 years. He's going to go out with a bang, or, you know, just do what he wanted to accomplish. And I think he has a lot more power on his side, a lot more influence. He has people who run social media on his side, and he's going to be a bit more daring.
What do you make of what we heard from Biden's final speech from the Oval Office last night?
I think it's really interesting the way that he sort of leaned into this rhetoric of the American experiment, and the way that he compares tech oligarchs to the robber barons. He's very much leaning into this patriotic American imagery that I think the Democratic Party started to embrace with Kamala and Waltz, didn't get entirely there with it. And I think his warning is very fascinating. It's very reminiscent of Carter's speech before Reagan took the office. But yeah.
How do you think he'll be remembered?
I mean, he kind of said this himself in his farewell speech, that he doesn't really, there's not much of a tangible legacy for him to show right now, that you'll see, you know, the seeds have been planted and you'll see the fruits of them later on down the line. I think he'll be remembered as a largely ineffective, or maybe just sort of a placeholder in the hopes of preventing Trump from taking office, which he has clearly failed to do. I think a lot of people will feel pity for him going forward. He's very old, and you know, you just want him to have a decent retirement.
We'll come to you, young lady. Good to see you both. Thank you both very much indeed for joining us on the programme. Appreciate it. Of course, we'll be covering that throughout the day on Monday here on Sky News. But I do just want to bring you that breaking news that's reached us within the last few moments here at Sky News, and it relates to the ceasefire that should come into place in Gaza on Sunday. We've heard from the Israeli Prime Minister's office. Israel will not set a date for a cabinet and government meeting until the mediators announce that Hamas has approved all the details of the agreement. In order for the ceasefire to come into effect, then the Israeli cabinet does need to ratify that deal. That was first announced to us 10 o'clock last night. The Israeli government saying, we're not signing it as of yet, and we're not planning a cabinet meeting for now.
Weeknights on Sky News.
This is your chance. Tell people. Welcome to the Politics Hub.
Our police force has apologised. If you want to find out about Grimsby, you come to the docks.
I'm live in Jerusalem.
Are you not concerned that that could lead to all-out war?
Hello there, good evening. There are fears of an upsurge in violence. What's at stake here?
You are watching the press preview, a first look at the front pages as they arrive.
Good morning from Doha. Breaking news now, and Israel says its cabinet will not meet to approve a ceasefire, accusing Hamas of backing out of understandings and creating a last-minute crisis. The deal was due to start on Sunday when 33 Israeli hostages and hundreds of Palestinian prisoners to be released in the first stage of the ceasefire.
Israel's Prime Minister has accused Hamas of a last-minute blackmail attempt and says the cabinet won't meet until the issue has been resolved.
At least 32 Palestinians have been killed in Israeli strikes on Gaza overnight, and there have been more explosions in the last few minutes.
Also ahead on the breakfast show here on Sky News, Thursday morning, Keir Starmer is in Kyiv to show his support for Ukraine, just days before Donald Trump returns to the White House. The economy grows just by 0.1% in November, below expectations. And liftoff, we have liftoff. Amazon founder Jeff Bezos' rocket blasts off from Cape Canaveral, ushering in a new frontier in the space race.
Good morning from Doha. The ceasefire agreement negotiated here in Qatar between Israel and Hamas appears to be very fragile this morning. In the past half hour, the office of Israel's Prime Minister has said Hamas is backing out of the Gaza ceasefire agreement. Earlier, Benjamin Netanyahu warned that the deal was not yet sealed. Just have a look at this statement from the Israeli Prime Minister's office. It said Hamas is backing out of the understandings and creating a last-minute crisis that prevents a settlement. Hamas is backing out of the explicit understandings agreed upon with the mediators and Israel in a last-minute blackmail attempt. Israel will not set a date for a cabinet and government meeting until the mediators announce that Hamas has approved all the details of the agreement. Well, let's go straight to our international correspondent, Alex Rossi, who joins us live from Jerusalem this morning. Alex, just gives you a sense of how fragile, how precarious this deal is. It wasn't supposed to come into effect until Sunday. Last night, we saw a number of delays before the Qatari Prime Minister came out at that press conference and said that the deal had been sealed. We were waiting for the Israeli cabinet to meet this morning to approve it, and now this latest spanner in the works.
Yeah, Yalda, good morning from Jerusalem. I think we knew that this would be an enormously difficult deal for both sides, but perhaps not just how difficult. And we are seeing this morning some of those complications rearing up. The Prime Minister's office accusing Hamas of blackmail this morning. We understood that the Security Cabinet was going to meet this morning. They were going to discuss the agreement and vote on it. The government would vote on it. But now that appears to be in jeopardy, with the Prime Minister's office saying that actually they're not going to have any of those meetings until mediators have clarified and resolved these outstanding issues. It's not immediately clear what those issues are. It may be around the prisoner exchange. Who exactly are the prisoners that are going to be released by Israel? That may be a sticking point. Another possible sticking point is about the withdrawal of Israeli soldiers, the IDF, from various parts of Gaza. Again, we wait to see exactly what that is. But I think it speaks really just how complicated all of this and how delicate it all is. I think the best way to perhaps look at it is not so much as a ceasefire, but really a cessation of hostilities which can be built on in subsequent phases to lead to a permanent ceasefire. But the suggestion at the moment from the Prime Minister's office is that this is in jeopardy, with Benjamin Netanyahu stating quite clearly that he claims that Hamas is trying to blackmail Israel at the last moment.
Yeah, as you say, the Israeli Prime Minister's office putting out this statement saying that the cabinet will not be meeting and the government meetings will not take place until the mediators announce that Hamas has approved all the details of the agreement, accusing Hamas of blackmail. Let's just show you these live images that are coming in from Jerusalem, Alex, and they're images of an anti-ceasefire demonstration that's currently taking place. You can see the coffins laid out, which with the Israeli flags. 1,200 people were killed after October 7 when Hamas crossed into Israel and entered a number of kibbutzim. They took with them about 250 hostages into Gaza. And so this really is now an anti-ceasefire demonstration that is taking place because we know that there are still 94 hostages, some alive, some waiting for their bodies to return. Let's take you to Gaza now as well and show you live images coming in from Khan Yunis. It's been a difficult morning for Palestinians. Last night, the airstrikes continued with at least 32 people killed. And we have heard that in the last few minutes, there have been a number of airstrikes that have taken place in Gaza. The ceasefire itself will not kick in until Sunday, so no doubt that the bombardment will continue until Sunday. Let's bring in our Alex Rossi again. Alex, this ceasefire deal is just so fragile, and we know that these airstrikes will continue until Sunday. They have continued in the last few minutes and, of course, overnight as well, which left 32 people dead.
Yeah, I mean, the suffering in Gaza has been absolutely immense for the Palestinian people there. Something like 46,000 people have been killed during this conflict. The actual number, we understand, may be even higher. It's very difficult to gauge exactly how many people have been killed. And the humanitarian suffering continues and will continue actually long past the ceasefire if it does take place on Sunday. We understand as part of the agreement, Yalda, that the amount of aid going into Gaza will increase quite dramatically. On some days at the moment, as few as 50 trucks manage to get into the enclave. Not nearly enough people, not nearly enough aid for the millions of people inside Gaza. But we understand that the the number of trucks could go up to about 600, bringing in vital humanitarian supplies. But of course, people there, as they are in Israel, remain extremely anxious, very nervous to see whether or not this deal will go through. They will, of course, be reflecting on these comments from Prime Minister Netanyahu's office, accusing Hamas of blackmailing Israel at the last moment. What's difficult to decipher is whether this is just turbulence around the deal. We always knew it would be fragile, or whether or not it is something much more serious. We should have a better idea of that in the hours to come, but it really speaks to just how fragile this deal remains.
Yeah, absolutely. A deal that has a number of phases that could go on for many months. The first phase, 42 days and about 33 hostages coming out over the course of the 6 weeks. But as you say, a statement coming in from the Israeli Prime Minister's office that this deal is currently on pause. They say Hamas is backing out of the understandings and creating a last-minute crisis that prevents a settlement. The statement goes on to say Hamas is backing out of the explicit understandings agreed upon with the mediators in Israel in a last-minute blackmail attempt. Israel will not set a date for a cabinet and government meeting until the mediators announce that Hamas has approved all the details of the agreement. No doubt the Qatari mediators, the Egyptian mediators, as well as the Americans will be swinging into action to try and iron out all of these differences, because as Alex was saying, they're an incredibly fragile deal already, and we don't know how serious this actual pause is. For now, it will unfold over the coming hours, and we will be following all the developments. You're looking at live pictures from Gaza. Overnight, 32 people were killed in an airstrike, and we are hearing that there have been more strikes in the last few minutes. This was expected. The journalists from Gaza that I've spoken to who were here in Doha told me last night that they have told their colleagues, they've told their family members to stay inside their homes, because usually ahead of a ceasefire like this, there is often an escalation of violence before the guns fall silent. You're looking at some of those live pictures coming in from Gaza this morning. These are images coming in from Khan Yunis, with people celebrating last night, but more airstrikes taking place this morning. And now this statement from the Israeli Prime Minister's office. Kay, we are following all the developments here on the ground. But for now, back to you in the studio.
OK, Yalda, thanks very much indeed. 11:10 on the ground in Gaza. Will they continue to be able to celebrate a potential ceasefire come Sunday? Simon is here with us. What's going on?
It could just be, as your correspondent said, the sort of turbulence that could be expected. There's also, perhaps, as we saw, the Israelis attempting to try and kill people they wanted to just before the ceasefire happened. Or there may be a recognition, particularly on the Israeli side, that this could be a process that leads strategically to a place that Netanyahu and his government are uncomfortable with. Because at the end of this whole negotiation phase, there's supposed to be the building of a sustainable peace, which has got to have some kind of recognition of Palestinians' desire for self-determination and statehood. So there's a whole strategic issue here, as well as the tactical issues around it. And of course, we've also seen, if you're trying to build trust, you're trying to get people to believe in each other's good word, attacks, which probably killed one or two Hamas operatives, but it's actually had an effect on, as we see, at least 32 civilians who have been killed. So probably achieved nothing. They achieved nothing in terms of building trust. You kill a lot more civilian people. And in those sort of circumstances, I think Hamas and the Gaza people go, do you know what's this ceasefire all about? It's really problematic. If it's a ceasefire essentially saying we're no longer going to fight, and yet, even though there's a formal date for it, the fighting is still continuing.
We normally see this, don't we, ahead of a ceasefire?
You do, but I think the level of distrust between these two, because it's not state and state armies. So these are not like, it's not like two armies who kind of are under control and say, no, you stay away from our area, we've got this under control. This is an insurgent army, a very well-equipped insurgent army, and the Israelis. And I don't think that therefore there's a sort of asymmetric element here between the two things. So trust and actually will you believe each other, which I think what we're looking for is missing at the moment.
As President Trump-elect wakes up this morning, he'll be looking at these images. He'll also be hearing that the Israeli government has not yet ratified this ceasefire. He's got his inauguration on Monday. He's not going to be happy about this.
He'll be furious. He'll be absolutely furious. I mean, this is, he was boasting of it yesterday, and indeed the positive thing about it being the way in which the two administrations, the current administration and the incoming administration, have been working together. And Biden's original words, one team, to try and bring this about. But he was being very, very upset indeed that this has now come about. The Israelis are blaming Hamas. No doubt Hamas will try and blame Israel for it. But you're absolutely right. As far as President Trump is concerned, he'll be absolutely furious because he wants to go into that inauguration on Monday with, if you like, a deal, and he's a property man, a deal in his pocket. And that's what he wants to say.
And your best guess at this stage?
We could have 24 hours of turbulence. I think everybody, and again, the correspondents are very clear, everybody's now going to be focusing on this, say, what's behind this? What can we do to try and sort this out? It will probably delay the ceasefire, but it's not, because it's so close, and we've been here for nearly 8 months, I hope that the recognition that there's a really important, bigger prize will be taken by everybody. But I fear there's not, we can't guarantee it.
OK, for now, thank you. Let me bring you, obviously we'll continue to cover events there, Yalda, on the scene for us throughout the course of the day, as is Alex and indeed Alistair as well. Before that, though, I want to tell you about some breaking news, and 2 teenage boys have been charged with the murder of a 14-year-old boy. Kalian Bokassa was stabbed to death on a bus in Woolwich in south-east London last week. A 15-year-old boy from Woolwich and a 16-year-old boy from Plumstead have been charged with his murder in the early hours of this morning. Meantime, Sakir is in Kyiv this morning on his first visit to Ukraine as Prime Minister. He's expected to sign a partnership deal with Ukraine's President Zelensky in an attempt to secure relations ahead of Donald Trump's return to the White House. Our political editor, Beth Rigby, is travelling with the PM and sent this update.
The Prime Minister here in Kyiv this morning. It's his first visit to the country since he took office, although he has met President Zelensky a number of times. And it comes at a critical moment with Trump poised to enter the White House in but days, and an expectation amongst European allies that peace negotiations will begin. President Trump has made it clear he wants to end the war in Ukraine. The conflict is dependent on billions of dollars of funding from the US. President Trump wants to negotiate, says he wants to talk to Putin. And so what we've got at the moment is a British Prime Minister coming over here to show solidarity and support with Ukraine amongst European allies. Now, today he's going to announce a 100-year partnership with Ukraine aimed at deepening security and cultural ties. There also might be an update of more support in terms of weapons for Ukraine as the war intensifies ahead of Donald Trump entering the White House with Russia making gains. And the Prime Minister coming to Kyiv has said Putin's ambition to wrench Ukraine away from its closest partners has been a monumental failure. And he said it showed that we are closer than ever and this partnership will be taken to the next level. So the British Prime Minister here, as I said, a critical time for Ukraine in this near 3-year-long war. There will be lots of discussion, I think, today about what peace negotiations might look like, because the tone has shifted from victory for Ukraine and doubling down in support for as long as it takes to putting Ukraine in the best possible position for negotiations. There's questions around a peacekeeping force once a deal is agreed, although that could be some way off. So will those negotiations happen between the Prime Minister and President Zelensky? What about NATO membership, EU membership? All the questions that will be asked throughout the day. But for the moment, this is all about the UK showing solidarity with Ukraine ahead of Trump entering the White House, and a very different outlook in terms of what the US wants around this conflict.
Rudik reporting for us from Kiev, where Sir Keir Starmer is today. Good news for him back home?
Yeah, just good news for him and the Chancellor of the Exchequer. We got GDP figures, measure of growth in the economy. In November, the British economy returned to growth a little bit, 0.1 percentage point of growth. Now, significant in that October and September had both seen negative growth. Over the 3 months to November, though, the economy is flat. Expectations were actually that there'd be a bit more growth, 0.2%. So yesterday we were talking about inflation figures being a bit of a shot in the arm because they were better than expected. This being a bit less than expected, perhaps not as significant. The markets seem to have taken it in their stride. But it's worth saying there was growth in the first half of this year. If we look at the economy over the 6 months, this is 5 months of figures, July to November, since Labour's been in power, the economy is actually the same size in November as it was in July, and this is the time. This is clearly on the new government, and the suggestion, certainly from the opposition, but from many businesses we talk to, is a combination of the tone, talking down the economy, as it were, talking about the doom and gloom, and then the budget, which has got big tax increases coming for businesses, has been depressing. I spoke to the Chancellor this morning, and she defended her approach and said, in fact, she gives a list of investments that are coming, which will help her plan, which is her priority still is growth.
OK.
The most important thing to grow the economy is returning stability to the economy. And when I became Chancellor, there was a £22 billion black hole in the public finances. We couldn't carry on like that, because that is the road to ruin. We saw that under the last Conservative government. When they play fast and loose with the public finances, it is ordinary working people that pay the price. So I've drawn a line under that instability and ensured that the sums now add up.
She better hope they add up.
Yeah.
Because the suggestion is that the absolute suggestion of the recent increases in the cost of borrowing, because the bond market's they've stabilised a bit, is that they've actually the cost of maintaining Britain's debt will eat into her headroom, and the sums won't add up. So we'll find out in March whether that's true. She's called the regulators in, Ofgem, the people who look after all these services today, to ask them to prioritise growth. looking for some ideas. She's off to Davos next week, the big gathering of business and political leaders, where she will be meeting lots of investors, hoping, presumably, to come home with some commitments for some more inward investments, so you can say, yes, this budget might hurt, but it is going to deliver growth in the long run.
I see. Time will tell, as they say.
It will.
Paul Van Eyck, thank you. Let's show you a new frontier in the space race.
Lift off.
Jeff Bezos' Blue Origin rocket has lifted off from Cape Canaveral in Florida. It's the first test flight for the ship, called New Glenn, after a planned launch was called off on Monday. The 98-metre rocket has been long in the making, with heavy funding from the Amazon founder. Still to come on The Breakfast Show for you Thursday morning, claims from Israel's Prime Minister that Hamas is already backtracking on the Gaza ceasefire deal. We'll ask the Israeli government what's going on, and we'll get a Palestinian perspective on the war. Plus, standing with her homeland, we hear from the Ukrainian fashion designer who created this artwork about her latest charity efforts.
Many people have told me that God spared my life for a reason.
President for a second time.
That reason being to save our country, he said.
A remarkable moment, isn't it?
Another chance, another 4 years. The question is, what does he do with those 4 years?
Watch the inauguration of Donald Trump as he becomes president for the second time.
So help me God. Congratulations, Mr. President.
The full story, first on Sky News.
I'm Stuart Ramsey, and I'm Sky's chief correspondent.
The enormous explosion that's just come down, I think it was a monster just landed in between us.
Hundreds and hundreds of people hoping to get north, ultimately to get to the United States.
It's a border where they're not welcome, yet they keep coming.
We saw snatch squads going in, grabbing people, taking them out and putting them into trucks and taking them away.
They make about 50 kilos of fentanyl a week. It's incredibly dangerous and toxic stuff.
There's been an upsurge in deaths. The fighting between the gangs is getting more and more vicious.
Is this now all your territory?
Yeah.
The battlefield is outside the barricades, which is over there. This is much more like a normal town. It's really sending a clear message that Venezuela is eager for change. We've been crushed.
Free from wherever you get your news. We are in the middle of a forest, in a jungle really, and they're attempting to keep these men alive. This is real, hardcore emergency medicine. The information on this could bring down the entire network, not just in Iraq and Syria, but across the world. Sky News, the full story first.
Well, hundreds of thousands of people have been using the beast for years to traverse Mexico, but it is really dangerous. Many people have died riding it.
I'm James Matthews, and I'm Sky's US correspondent, based here in Washington, D.C. Donald Trump, it would appear, is about to learn his fate. There's no doubting the strength of this hurricane as it roars through. Sky News, get the full story first. Do you fear a fourth indictment? Is it a draw?
He's from Sky News. He's from Sky News. He's entitled to ask me questions.
There's always more to the news than a headline. We want to discover, to delve a little deeper, to find out what's really going on. Explanation, analysis, the people at the heart of every story. I'm Neil Patterson, and this is the Sky News Daily Podcast. So, by the end, we'll hopefully all understand what's going on in the world just that little better. Available wherever you get your podcasts.
Hello and welcome back to Doha. With me, Yalda Hakim. In the last few minutes, we've had some breaking news from the Israeli Prime Minister's office. Of course, we've been covering the developments here on the ground, a ceasefire deal that was agreed last night by both Israel and Hamas. The Prime Minister's office has now issued a statement saying the deal is on pause. They've said Hamas is backing out of the understandings and creating a last-minute crisis that prevents a settlement. Hamas is backing out of the explicit understandings agreed upon with the mediators and Israel in a last-minute blackmail attempt. Israel will not set a date for a cabinet and government meeting until the mediators announce that Hamas has approved all the details of the agreement. As we've been reporting, the Israeli cabinet were due to meet this morning to agree to this settlement, to this ceasefire deal. In the last few minutes, Hamas has now issued a statement saying that they adhere to the agreement of last night. Let's bring in the Israeli government spokesperson, David Mencer, who joins me now. And David, you and I spoke in the last hour and a half. You were cautiously optimistic, but you said that this agreement was necessary for peace in the region, for peace for the Israeli people as well as Palestinians, to end this bloodshed. In the last few minutes, we've had this statement from the Israeli Prime Minister. Hamas has now come out and said that they agree and adhere to the agreement from last night. What on earth has happened in the last few minutes?
Yes, Yalda. Look, let's make one thing clear. Israel wants this agreement to move forward, but even last night, and it seems this morning as well, everything is not quite as clear as we hoped it would be. I mean, none of this is a surprise, of course, because two factors. Number one, Hamas are a jihadi organization. They're not renowned for their agreement-keeping capabilities. And the second thing is, of course, we're in the Middle East, where most of the negotiation seems to happen right at the very last minute. Even last night, there was a strong insistence by our Prime Minister, and Hamas folded on their last-minute demand to change the deployment of IDF forces in the Philadelphia corridor, so crucial to stop weapons smuggling. But there are also other items which it seems this morning have not been finalised or Hamas are walking away from. I make clear that the Prime Minister and the government...
David, I just want to get more clarity from you when you say, because of course this entire thing doesn't kick in till Sunday, and there are multiple phases. Have Hamas sent a message via the negotiators to Israel to say we're not agreeing to these certain things? Because, of course, despite what you're saying about Hamas, the Americans are there. Steve Witkoff, Brett McGurk, the Biden administration envoy, as well as the Trump administration envoy, they were in the room last night in Doha with the Qatari Prime Minister, putting pressure on Hamas to ensure that they agreed to all of the different elements of this deal. And it is complicated, and Israel does want its hostages to come home. What has happened, though, in the last few minutes which makes Israel believe that they are going to breach this agreement when it hasn't actually kicked in? Have they sent a message to Israel to say we're not agreeing to certain things?
So, Yalda, we won't be negotiating on air. What I can tell you is that the Israeli government wants this deal to be finalised, but only a finalised deal, which is agreed to on all sides, can be brought to Israel's cabinet. It cannot be a deal which is correct in some places and not in others. So what our Prime Minister has this morning, our office has this morning said, is that there has been a walking away from certain aspects of this agreement to free our hostages, which was agreed to previously, but now Hamas have walked away. Now, we want to get clarity on this situation.
Are they walking away from releasing the hostages? And was this message conveyed to you by the Qataris or the Americans?
I won't be sharing any of the details on air with you right now, but the Prime Minister's, our office statement has said that there remains disagreement. Some things which we thought were agreed have been changed, and until the agreement is finalised, again, with this jihadi organisation, not famous for making agreements, plus we're in the Middle East, where in the last minute people try to get the best deal for themselves. This deal cannot be brought to Israel's cabinet to vote on until it is finalised.
So there was a deal that was put on President-elect Donald Trump's table, and he was told last night that the deal has been agreed to by all sides. He then issued a statement to say the hostages will be coming home, that this is an epic deal. Was he premature and wrong to do that?
So none of this is surprising to us because we're dealing with Hamas, which is a jihadi organisation. It's not talking about the Bank of England and making an agreement with the Bank of England, who hopefully you can rely on. This is a jihadi organisation. We want this deal to succeed. But if parts of the deal are being changed at the last, even past the last moment, then it cannot be brought to the Israeli government cabinet to vote on until everything is agreed and buttoned down.
And just briefly, David, because I know you have to go, but there is also division within the Israeli cabinet. The likes of the National Security Minister boasting, Ben-Gvir, that he has, put spanners in the works in previous deals and he doesn't want this deal to go through. Is that what Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is also dealing with?
So we're a democracy with free speech. Everyone can make their opinion clear. But ultimately, what a democracy means is that the majority rule goes. We believe there's a majority in the country, and we are confident that there's a majority in this cabinet as well as in the government for this agreement to move forward. But it must be buttoned down, and there must not be Hamas changing parts of the agreement even after it has been agreed. Once the agreement is agreed, we can bring it to our cabinet for agreement. That's what Israel's government wants, but last-minute changes are simply not acceptable. So we're buttoning down any last-minute issues to bring it to our government where the majority rule will prevail.
David, thank you so much for joining us again so quickly on the programme to provide some clarity. And we know that you'll be holding a press conference in a few hours' time. Thanks very much for joining us. I just want to show you some images coming into us from Jerusalem at the moment. This is an anti-ceasefire demonstration. Not everyone in Israel agrees to this ceasefire. The hostage families are desperate for the hostages to return home. They have waited. It's been a painful wait over the course of the last 15 months. The people of Gaza are desperate for this ceasefire to kick in on Sunday. We've also seen images from Gaza where in the last few minutes there have been more airstrikes. 32 people were killed overnight in airstrikes as well. So they are desperate for the guns to fall silent. But you are looking at those images of Jerusalem, of that anti-ceasefire demonstration. And you're now looking at images, aerial shots of Gaza, where and now of Khan Yunis in Gaza, where people were celebrating last night when they heard news of this ceasefire. It is quiet this morning, although in the last few minutes we've also heard that there have been more aerial bombardment. When I was speaking to Palestinian journalists overnight who have been based here in Doha, they told me that they have told colleagues to stay indoors because there could be an escalation in the bombardment, in the bloodshed, until the ceasefire kicks in on Sunday. But as we've said, the Israeli Prime Minister's office has said that this deal is on pause. We just heard there from the Israeli government spokesperson as well, accusing Hamas of making last-minute changes. Hamas say that they adhere to and agree to the ceasefire that was agreed to last night. So you can just see and hear how fragile this deal already is. It hasn't kicked in yet. There are multiple phases. It is incredibly complex. We will be following all the developments here on the ground, Kay.
OK, for now, thanks so much indeed, Yalda. Thank you. Our own Prime Minister in Kyiv today. What's that got to do with what we're looking at the moment? Well, let me tell you in a little bit more detail. This is work that has been done by youngsters, young Ukrainian children here in the UK that have been displaced. Maria Diakola is with us. Tell me all about it.
Well, back in June, I have been invited to St. Mary's Ukrainian School in London to have a creative workshop with Ukrainian children. And I asked children to draw their dreams. And this is original artwork of Ukrainian children from St. Mary's Ukrainian School in London. And you can see a lot of pets and animals which they miss, and they want to be reunited back in Ukraine. They would like to be back to their homes, to their families.
So this is, let's point out a couple of them. This is what one of the little ones has done. This is obviously their depiction of their home back in Ukraine, and we can see them at their windows there. It's very important for kids to be able to do art, isn't it, when they're trying to talk about their emotion.
This actually has a beautiful story, because a little boy, he said, I don't know my dreams, I don't know what I dream of, but I just draw this house and my family, and this is what I would like to be back, return to my home and family in Ukraine. But also, it's so many beautiful, positive messages. Some children want to be Olympic championship.
I saw the Olympics.
Yeah, the gymnast. It's really beautiful. Or footballer, or travel around the world.
Okay, there we go. There's the Olympics. Perhaps one day, I'm doing the splits, perhaps one day that may be able to happen. And lots of depictions of the Ukrainian flag as well.
Yes, well, yeah, it's a beautiful message. And I feel like nice to be a voice of children, Ukrainian children. And thank you so much for bringing this beautiful artwork. And so the collage is being displayed in a blue globe and with yellow orb, which is the flag of Ukraine, yes. And
but you thought, you know what, I've got to put all these together as a collage, but how can I possibly make money to then be able to support the school? So you came up with the idea of a scarf.
So this is beautiful scarf, which is the artwork we placed on the scarf, which together with Aspinall of London we created.
Oh, very nice.
Which the purchases from the scarf go to the St. Mary's Ukrainian Trust. Yes, and also whoever would love to support the school, on 2nd of February they have fundraising gala event. If you would like to join, please join or donate to the school. And yes.
That's
this is beautiful scarf, and I decided to wear the scarf.
How clever is that? How clever is that? So you made it into a fashion piece as well. But I do want to just talk a little bit more about animals before I let you go, because animals are very important to children, aren't they? Especially when they are struggling with their emotions. And I can see that there's a parrot here, there's a cat here. Not sure what that is, but it's lovely.
It's also a cat.
Oh, is it? Of course, it's a cat. How could I not have seen that?
It's nice to see. I think children is the most creative, and it's beautiful to see there, and very simple and very creative. But when you look at all their dreams, it's Ukrainian children, but it could be any child dream, because it's very simple. They would like to be with their family, at their home, with their pets, and it's very universal.
They like to be able to travel
and travel around the world to space. So it's very like universal message from children, and very beautiful and simple. And it's nice to bring the message through art and positive art and children messages.
I know it's been a struggle to get it here, and it's been difficult to move it around, but thanks to the children at St Mary's who've allowed us to have it with us today. We're always very keen to support the situation in Ukraine here on this programme. We thought it was perfect, given that the Prime Minister is there today, to show some of the artwork that displaced children from Ukraine have put together. You've created this collage, and people can help by buying a scarf and the money going to those children. We appreciate you taking the time to join us today. We're going to leave you with the images of what some of these children have come up with, and we'll see you in just a second. Hello again, everybody. Let's get more now on that ceasefire deal and consider whether it will lead to permanent peace. Ghada Kalmi is a Palestinian academic and research fellow at the Institute of Arab and Islamic Studies at the University of Exeter, joining us now. It's good to see you, as always. How are you feeling this morning?
Well, cautiously optimistic. That's the best way I can put it. It's wonderful news. If it were to happen, if this ceasefire agreement were to happen, it's the most wonderful news for the people of Gaza and a tribute to their outstanding courage, resilience, steadfastness and fortitude. Really, there's no other way to put it. However, having said that, we are dealing with Israel. And Israel is a very difficult customer as far as the Palestinians have been concerned. It's unreliable, it's devious, and it's ill-intentioned. So the possibility of Israel creating some problem along this deal is very high indeed. And it would be very silly of anybody who knows anything about it to just rejoice, just like that. I can't blame the people of Gaza. They've had such a terrible time. You cannot blame them. The merest hint, chink of light in their lives is welcome. But that's not true for the rest of us who know what Israel is all about. You know, this deal, this ceasefire deal, could have been agreed in May of last year. It's the same deal. Hamas accepted it then, the Israelis didn't. As a result, we've had months of further bloodshed, of further killing of Gazan women and children. And now they claim, or they say, that they're going to accept this. I really hope so. Two things to bear in mind, though. First of all, this is a staged agreement. Now, the problem with that is that at every stage, things could go wrong. So it's not a one-off. There's a first phase, and a second phase, and a third phase. Each of these phases has to be negotiated, given Israel's ill will, as I've said, and it's the problem of dealing with Israel. I foresee problems. That's first thing. Second thing is...
There's a lot to unpack here, but I'll let you finish your point. Go on.
OK, now I know there's a lot to unpack, but it's very important I get this across. You see, the other thing about this is that Israel has been humiliated and defeated. That's what's happened. Now, it came into Gaza, it bombed the hell out of Gaza, it claimed for two objectives. One, the release of the hostages. Second, the annihilation of Hamas. 15 months later, the hostages have not been released. Many of them have died. Indeed, but they've only released by negotiation, not by Israel's bombing. So some have been released. Not all of them have been released. Secondly, Hamas is not defeated. So Israel has
failed. It's certainly in a position where it is not the organisation that it once was, is what Israel would say. They would also say that they want this deal, and they have eventually come to a conclusion where they hoped that there would be a ceasefire on Sunday. But within the last half an hour or so, they've said we can't ratify this deal because Hamas are trying to blackmail us.
Typical. That's all I can tell you. It's absolutely typical. You could have predicted it. This has obviously happened while I've been on my way here to the studio to see you.
I understand that.
But it doesn't surprise me at all. The problems have already started. Because, you see, I go back to my point. Israel has achieved nothing beyond destroying Gaza, killing thousands of Palestinians, women, children, maiming them, ruining their lives forever.
Breaking the back of Hamas?
Well, Hamas is not gone.
It's not gone, but they are on the ropes, according to the Israeli government spokesperson that was on the show this morning.
Of course. That's what the Israelis would say. The reality is...
Several of their leaders have been killed.
No, they've obviously suffered losses. I'm not saying that they haven't. They've not gone, though. They're still a fighting force. They killed people. They killed Israeli soldiers only last week. So, you know, this isn't a victory in terms of Israel.
And the Israeli government may well say in response to that they could continue on until they have obliterated Hamas, but they have seen the death toll in Gaza, and as a result they have agreed to a ceasefire.
No, I think that the Israelis, two things very important to understand beneath the rhetoric. Firstly, the arrival of President Trump, which has obviously had an effect.
Of course.
Because one of the things that Israel has learned in the last 15 months is that it is totally reliant on the United States. It can't last a day without the United States.
They certainly benefit from their weaponry.
Well, more than benefits,
support.
It can't stand on its own 2 feet. That's become quite clear. So that's one factor. The other factor is that the Israeli state is in a very bad way. Their economy is damaged. Their soldiers, they've lost so many soldiers. The whole country is reeling and is in a state
After the attack on the 7th of October.
Well, no. I'm talking about...
Well, it is.
But the 7th of October started this. The 7th of October wouldn't lead to the collapse of Israel. What has led to the collapse of Israel...
Israel hasn't collapsed.
No. What I'm saying is it hasn't led to the, if you like, the danger of collapse, OK? The reason that has happened is because they have been engaged in a genocidal war for 15 months without achieving a single aim. That's the problem. Now, the other thing that I wanted to stress was that if
They would also
got...
disagree that it was a genocidal war.
Well, if you've got a defeated, humiliated country in Israel, it's very dangerous.
Why do you feel it's defeated?
As I've just pointed out, it
But it
came
isn't
in
defeated.
with 2 objectives, none of which has been realised. What more do you want? It hasn't annihilated Hamas. It has not released all the hostages. Those were the war aims, weren't they?
But more hostages will be released, we're told, as a result of the ceasefire if it goes through on Sunday. And this is what the IDF and Israel would say, and as a result of the ceasefire, if the ceasefire comes into effect, it will mean that the continued loss of life in Gaza will come to an end.
Yes, I really hope so. But the question of the hostage release is entirely to do with negotiations. It was not affected by Israeli bombing, and you wouldn't expect it.
But you did say, if I may be so bold, Garda, you did say that it was the United States that affected the ceasefire, but also this ceasefire was in place more or less. The bones of it were in place as far back as last May, and yet Joe Biden didn't manage to get the ceasefire over the line.
No, he didn't, because Joe Biden was in hock to the Israelis. He couldn't say no to them. The Israelis weren't keen. Netanyahu turned it down, so Biden just followed suit. The other aspect of this, I need to make clear to your viewers,
Please.
is that the answer to the question is, what has Israel got out of this? What has it actually achieved? Well, I'll tell you. It has made itself
It's broken down the Iranian proxies that are threatening its very existence.
It has made itself into a pariah state. Nobody likes Israel. It is hated throughout the region. It has made enemies everywhere.
Saudi Arabians would not necessarily agree with that.
Saudi Arabia isn't making any deals with Israel, is
They were
it?
about to.
Well, we don't know till it happens. You cannot deny that the Israelis have invited the opprobrium, the criticism, the condemnation of many, many people in the world. The fact that you have a solidarity movement which is so powerful, particularly in the West, particularly in this country, is testament to Israel's failure to achieve anything in Gaza except to make itself hated. That's not much of a legacy, is it, if you're Israel?
as I said, I've put the points that I'm sure the Israelis would put to you if they were sat here, Gada, but it's good to talk to you today. Let's hope that the ceasefire does go ahead and that up to 50,000 Gazans who have so far died as a result of the war, that number will stop come Sunday.
So fervently.
And also that the hostages will come home.
Indeed, indeed.
Thank you
I
very
hope
much.
so.
Thank you. Thank you. Let me tell you about President Biden. He's delivered his farewell address before he leaves office on Monday. He warned of a dangerous oligarchy threatening American democracy in an apparent dig at some of the supporters around incoming leader Donald Trump. Mark Stone reports from Washington.
As the sun set on the Biden White House, this was his farewell moment, an address to the nation, the final one.
My fellow Americans, I'm speaking to you tonight from the Oval Office.
And if expectations were that he would use it to list his achievements with the bitterness of a man who lost, well, then expectations were wrong. It was instead a siren song farewell.
I want to warn the country of some things that give me great concern.
And words he perhaps hopes will echo long after he's gone.
Today, an oligarchy is taking shape in America of extreme wealth, power, and influence that literally threatens our entire democracy, our basic rights and freedoms, and a fair shot for everyone to get ahead.
Far from being a greatest hits farewell, it was instead an extension of his Trump is a threat to democracy argument.
Take over, Elijah, take over.
And that threat is here, the man he did not name, who represents, he said, a dangerous concentration of power.
I'm equally concerned about the potential rise of a tech-industrial complex that could pose real dangers for our country as well. Americans are being buried under an avalanche of misinformation and disinformation, enabling the abuse of power. The free press is crumbling. Editors are disappearing. Social media is giving up on fact-checking. The truth is smothered by lies told for power and for profit.
President Biden knows that no one writes their own legacy. It's for others to do that. And so his message seemed to be wait and see, that in time, beyond his time, these predictions and his own achievements will be recognized, and that would be his legacy.
You know, it will take time to feel the full impact of all we've done together. But the seeds are planted, and they'll grow and they'll bloom for decades to come.
Right now, he is the president who precipitated the return of Donald Trump. He is the faltering figure whose hubris prevented him from stepping down before it was too late. He is the foreign policy president who couldn't control a chaotic world. But legacy isn't set in the moment. It is cemented long after. And to a great extent, that legacy will depend on what happens in here over the next 4 years. Mark Stone, Sky News, at the White House.
Breaking news now. Last week was the busiest week for the NHS this winter as high virus rates cause hospitals to be overcrowded with patients. Let's get more with Laura standing by. Hi, Laura.
Yeah, morning, Kay. Look, it's some good news buried in all of this as well. Yes, it was the busiest week of the winter. The hospitals saying they were jam-packed with these sky-high virus rates, but it looks like we are past the peak of flu. So let's just look in very quick detail at some of the data here. So last week there were 97,636 patients in hospital. That's the highest level so far this winter. This is the depressing bit. 1 in 7 of them were people who were actually ready and fit for discharge but unable to leave hospital. But this is the good news. Flu cases are down. So on average last week, on an average day, there were 4,929 people in hospital with flu. That is down 9% from the previous week. Norovirus is up slightly, but for all other winter viruses, bed occupation is down. Time lost to the ambulance handover, so an ambulance hands the patients over to A&E, that is also down last week as well. But we are past the peak, it looks like, of flu.
OK, for now. Thanks very much indeed. Thank you. Coming up, we will have all today's top stories for you with Wilfred, not least, what on earth is happening in the Middle East. We started this morning's coverage by suggesting that a ceasefire would be in place by Sunday. What is happening now? Suggestions that may not be the case in Gaza. We'll bring you more, as I said, with Wilf in just a moment.
I'm James Matthews, and I'm Sky's US correspondent, based here in Washington, D.C. Donald Trump, it would appear, is about to learn his fate. There's no doubting the strength of this hurricane as it roars through. Sky News, get the full story first. Do you fear a fourth indictment?
He's from Sky News. He's from Sky News. He's entitled to ask me questions.